5 armed men stormed Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant tonight. Their target, billionaire CEO Ethan Voss. But they didn't count on one thing, the quiet waitress who'd been hiding a deadly past. What happened next turned a simple dinner service into a war zone that would make international headlines. I'm bringing you this incredible true story of courage, betrayal, and redemption. Stay with me until the very end and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. The rain had started 3 hours before sunset, the kind of cold October drizzle that turned Manhattan's streets into rivers of reflected neon and made even billionaires grateful for warm, dry spaces. By 8 o'clock that Thursday evening, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Bernardin Noir, the kind of exclusive establishment where reservations required 6 months' notice and a credit line that could buy most people's houses. Inside, the restaurant glowed like a jewel box. Candlelight danced across white tablecloths, crystal glasses refracted amber light into tiny rainbows, and the soft murmur of Manhattan's elite created a symphony of power and privilege. The air smelled of truffle oil, expensive wine, and money, old money, new money, and the kind of money that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. Clara Novak moved through this world like a ghost. She'd been working at Le Bernardin Noir for 11 months now, and she'd perfected the art of invisibility. Her uniform was pressed to razor creases, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun that revealed nothing but efficiency, her movements economical and precise. She carried plates, poured wine, cleared courses, and disappeared between tasks as if she'd never existed at all. That was exactly how she wanted it. The other servers had stopped trying to befriend her after the first month. She never joined them for after-shift drinks, never shared stories about her life before the restaurant, never laughed at the kitchen staff's crude jokes or complained about difficult customers. She was professional, punctual, and utterly unremarkable, which took considerable effort because Clara Novak was anything but unremarkable. 6 years, 2 months, and 17 days ago, she'd worn a different uniform in a different world. Kevlar instead of cotton. A sidearm instead of a wine key. She'd carried a tactical radio instead of a serving tray, and she'd moved through dusty Beirut streets with the same careful precision she now used to navigate between tables of hedge fund managers and tech moguls. Back then, her name hadn't been Clara Novak. It had been Captain Clara Chen, and she'd been damn good at her job until the day she wasn't. She pushed the thought away, muscle memory taking over as she approached table 7. Her hands didn't shake as she set down the appetizer course, though her mind was already 3 moves ahead, cataloging exits and calculating sightlines in a habit she couldn't break even after 6 years of trying. The seared foie gras, she murmured, placing the plate before the evening's most notable guest. With black truffle reduction and microgreens from the chef's private garden. Ethan Voss didn't look up. He never did. At 42, Voss had the kind of face that magazines loved. Sharp cheekbones, steel gray eyes, and a jawline that suggested both aristocracy and ruthlessness. His dark suit probably cost more than Clara's entire year's salary, and he wore it with the casual indifference of a man who owned 11 companies and controlled assets worth somewhere north of $8 billion. The 2009 Chateau Margaux, his companion was saying, a nervous-looking man in his 50s with the haunted eyes of someone who'd signed contracts he regretted. You promised me until Monday to review the merger terms. I promised you nothing, Gerald. Voss's voice was smooth, cultured, and absolutely cold. Thorn Industries had 3 quarters to turn things around. You failed. Now you either sign by Friday or I go hostile, strip the company for parts, and you get nothing but severance and shame. Your choice. Gerald Marsh, Clara recognized him now from the financial news, the CFO of Thorn Industries, looked like he might be sick. His fork trembled against the bone china. Walter Thorn built that company from nothing, Gerald whispered. 40 years of his life, 30,000 employees. You'll destroy all of it for quarterly returns. I'll optimize it, Voss corrected, cutting into his foie gras with surgical precision. There's a difference. If Thorn had understood market dynamics instead of sentimentality, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Evolution is neither moral nor immoral, Gerald. It simply is. Clara's jaw tightened as she stepped back from the table. She'd served men like Voss 100 times before, men who measured human lives in spreadsheets and called destruction disruption. She told herself it wasn't her business, that she was just the waitress, that her job was to be invisible and nothing more. But old instincts died hard. As she turned toward the kitchen, her eyes swept the restaurant in the automatic threat assessment she'd been taught a lifetime ago. 43 guests, 6 servers, 1 sommelier, 2 bussers. The main entrance flanked by decorative columns, emergency exit behind the bar, kitchen access through double doors to her left. Windows facing Park Avenue, rain-slicked and dark beyond the golden glow of interior light. And outside, under a streetlight across the avenue, a black Mercedes van with its engine running. Clara's breath caught. It was probably nothing. A delivery vehicle, a private car service, someone waiting for their dinner companion. Completely normal. Except it had been there for 40 minutes. She'd noticed it when she'd cleared table 3, and then again at table 12, and again when she'd refilled water glasses at table 7. The same black van, engine idling, exhaust ghosting into the rain-soaked air, no one getting in or out, just waiting. She felt the familiar prickle at the base of her skull, the one that had saved her life in Kandahar and nearly gotten her killed in Beirut. The one she'd tried to drown in wine and therapy and the numbing routine of civilian life. Something was wrong. "Clara, you're hovering," Michael, the head server, whispered as he passed with a tray of champagne flutes. "Table 7 doesn't like hovering. Move." She moved, but her eyes stayed on the windows, on the van, on the way the rain caught the streetlight and made everything look slightly wrong, slightly off-kilter. At the bar, James Chen, no relation, just one of those coincidences that had made her smile sadly when she'd first started, was mixing cocktails with the precision of a chemist. He'd been a Marine, honorable discharge, and sometimes late at night when they were cleaning up, they'd exchange the kind of knowing glances that veterans shared. They never talked about it. They didn't have to. "Jim," she said quietly, setting down her empty tray. "You see that black van across the street?" He didn't look up from the Manhattan he was mixing, but his shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see it." "How long?" 45 minutes? Maybe 50. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm a bartender in a fancy restaurant, and I left that other life behind." He slid the cocktail across the bar to a waiting server. "I'm thinking you should too." But his hand moved subtly to his phone, and Clara knew he was already pulling up the security company's number, just in case. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Some instincts never died. She was about to head back to the kitchen when she noticed something else that made her blood run cold. Voss's bodyguard was gone. For the past 11 months, Clara had watched Marcus Webb sit at the small table near the entrance. A mountain of a man with alert eyes and the bulge of a shoulder holster barely concealed under his suit jacket. He never ate much, never drank, just sat and watched and radiated quiet menace to anyone who might have ideas about the billionaire under his protection. But his table was empty now. His drink, something clear over ice, probably vodka tonic, sitting half-finished, condensation pooling around the glass. Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Michael," she called to the head server, keeping her voice level. "Where's Voss's security?" Michael glanced at the empty table, frowned. "Probably bathroom break. Why?" "How long?" "I don't know, Clara. I don't track the security guy's bladder schedule." He gave her an odd look. "You feeling okay? You look pale." She didn't answer. Her eyes had found something else. A man in a dark overcoat standing near the alley entrance beside the restaurant, apparently talking on his phone. Nothing unusual about that, except he wasn't actually talking. His mouth wasn't moving. He was just holding the phone to his ear, looking at the restaurant, looking at his watch, looking back at the phone, waiting for something. "Jim," Clara said, her voice tight and urgent now. "Call security. Do it now." "Clara, do it now!" The bartender heard something in her voice that made him reach for his phone without argument. But before his fingers could touch the screen, the world exploded. The windows facing Park Avenue shattered inward in a cascade of glittering glass and rain and noise. The sound was massive, overwhelming, the crack of breaking glass mixing with screams and the crash of overturning tables. Cold air and water rushed into the warm restaurant like an invading army, and through the broken windows came the men. 5 of them, moving fast and fluid, dressed in black tactical gear with ski masks covering their faces. They held weapons. Compact submachine guns, probably MP7s, Clara's brain supplied automatically, and they moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, not random robbers, not desperate amateurs. These were professionals. The restaurant erupted into chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, chairs crashed as people tried to run, to hide, to understand what was happening. One of the attackers fired 3 rounds into the ceiling, controlled bursts, perfectly placed, and the noise was deafening in the enclosed space. "Everybody down!" The lead attacker's voice was harsh, amplified by command and adrenaline. "Face down on the floor, hands behind your heads. Anyone moves, anyone tries to be a hero, you die!" People dropped like puppets with cut strings. Expensive suits met expensive carpet, jewelry clinked against marble. The sounds of sobbing and whispered prayers filled the air. Clara didn't drop. Her body had already moved before her conscious mind caught up, sliding behind a concrete pillar, her back pressed against cold stone, her breathing controlled and steady despite the jackhammer of her heartbeat. Her eyes tracked the attackers, counting, assessing, cataloging. 5 men, leader positioning himself with clear sightlines to both entrances. 2 flanking positions, controlling the crowd. 1 covering the kitchen access. 1 moving toward... Her breath stopped. The 5th man was heading straight for table 7, straight for Ethan Voss. The billionaire had frozen in his seat, fork still in hand, his face gone white with shock. Gerald Marsh had dropped to the floor, whimpering, but Voss sat utterly still, watching the approaching attacker with the same analytical expression he probably used in boardroom negotiations. "Ethan Voss," the 5th attacker said, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. Everyone else had stopped screaming, stopped moving, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. How very convenient, exactly where they said you'd be. "Who are you?" Voss's voice was steady. Clara had to give him that. "What do you want?" "What we want?" The attacker laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "We want what you took, Mr. Voss. But since you've already spent it, destroyed it, consumed it like the parasite you are, we'll settle for justice instead." He raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Voss's head. "This is for Walter Thorne. This is for every life you've destroyed in your climb to the top. The ghosts of Ether Industries send their regards." Clara's mind raced. Ether Industries, she knew that name. It had been in the news 3 months ago, a hostile takeover by one of Voss's holding companies, a company stripped and sold for parts, the CEO found dead in his garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning ruled a suicide. Walter Thorne. He'd left a wife, 3 children, and a note blaming corporate raiders for destroying his life's work. These weren't random attackers. This was an execution. And Clara Chen? No, Clara Novak, the invisible waitress who just wanted to be left alone, was the only person in the room with the training to stop it. Her therapist's voice echoed in her head. "You don't have to save everyone, Clara. It wasn't your fault. You're allowed to have a normal life." But what was normal when 5 armed men were about to commit murder in front of 40 terrified witnesses? What was normal when she was the only one who could do something about it? She looked at her hands. They were steady. 6 years of trying to forget, trying to be someone else, someone smaller and safer and less haunted. But her hands remembered what they'd been trained to do. The lead attacker's finger began to tighten on the trigger. Clara moved. She grabbed a silver serving tray from a nearby station, solid, heavy, 14 inches of weighted steel, and threw it like a discus with every ounce of strength her 5'6" frame could generate. It spun through the air, catching light, and struck the gunman in the temple with a sound like a hammer on a bell. He went down hard, his weapon clattering across the floor. For one frozen moment, the entire restaurant seemed to exist outside of time. Everyone stared. The attackers, the hostages, even Voss, as the quiet waitress stepped out from behind her pillar, empty-handed but absolutely unbowed. "Bad idea," the lead attacker said, swinging his weapon toward her. Clara was already moving, her body remembering 6 years of close-quarters combat training, countless drills, muscle memory that had been burned into her neurons like circuitry. She grabbed a wine bottle from the nearest table, a 1982 Bordeaux, her mind noted absurdly, and hurled it at the overhead light fixture above the lead attacker. Glass exploded, wine sprayed, the light went dark. In the confusion and sudden shadows, Clara dove forward, rolling across broken glass, feeling shards bite through her uniform, but ignoring the pain. She came up behind the bar beside James, who stared at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. "My job," she said grimly. "Get everyone out the kitchen exit, now." Clara, "That's an order, Sergeant." Something in her voice, the tone of command, the echo of authority she'd tried to bury, made James snap to attention. He nodded once, then began moving in a low crouch toward the terrified hostages, whispering urgently, gesturing toward the kitchen doors. Gunfire erupted, bullets slamming into the bar above Clara's head, sending splinters of wood and bottles of premium liquor exploding into the air. The smell of gunpowder and alcohol filled her nose. "Who is she?" one of the attackers was shouting. "Where's the waitress?" Clara's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. They'd made a mistake. They'd planned for bodyguards, for security systems, for wealthy people who'd never thrown a punch in their lives. They hadn't planned for her. She grabbed 2 bottles of sparkling water from the bar cooler, heavy glass, carbonated and pressurized, and popped to her feet long enough to hurl them both at the nearest attacker. They struck like grenades, one hitting his chest, the other his knee. He stumbled, cursing, and Clara used the moment to vault over the bar, a move that would have made her gymnastics coach proud if she'd had one, landing in a roll that brought her up right beside the weapons locker she'd noticed on her second day of work. Every high-end restaurant in Manhattan had one. Insurance requirements after that incident in Tribeca 3 years ago. Fire extinguishers, first aid kit, pepper spray, and... She yanked open the small locker, grabbed the canister of industrial-strength pepper spray, and sprayed a wide arc toward the 2 attackers advancing on her position. They screamed, hands flying to their faces, weapons dropping. 2 down, 3 to go. And 40 terrified civilians trying to escape through a kitchen door that only opened one way. "Move!" Clara shouted at the crowd, her voice carrying the absolute authority of command. "Get to the kitchen! Stay low! Go now!" They moved. People who'd been frozen by fear suddenly found the courage to crawl, to run, to help each other toward the dubious safety of the kitchen. Michael was herding them through, his face pale but determined. James had grabbed a chef's knife from somewhere and was standing guard at the door like the Marine he'd once been. "You can't save them all," the lead attacker said. He'd recovered from the broken light, had taken cover behind an overturned table, his weapon trained on the fleeing crowd. "I can drop 10 of them before you reach me. Is that what you want? 10 dead civilians because you wanted to play hero?" Clara's blood ran cold. He was right. The kitchen door was 30 feet away. She was behind the bar. She couldn't close that distance before he could fire, unless... Her eyes fell on the restaurant's pride and joy, its centerpiece that had been featured in Architectural Digest, a massive wine display, a glass and steel sculpture that held 300 bottles of the world's finest vintages, reaching from floor to ceiling like a drunk person's version of a Christmas tree. It was held up by a single support column. Clara grabbed a bottle of 1990 Dom Perignon. She'd feel guilty about this later, and hurled it with precision at the base of the support column, where steel met marble floor. The champagne bottle struck, shattered, and the carbonated pressure combined with the impact point to create a small explosion of glass and liquid right at the structural weak point. The wine display swayed. "No!" someone screamed. Maybe the restaurant owner, maybe God himself objecting to the destruction of so much vintage nectar. The display fell like a redwood, 300 bottles of history and craftsmanship cascading down in a wave of glass and alcohol and spectacular destruction. It crashed between the gunman and the fleeing hostages, creating a wall of debris and broken bottles and spreading wine that looked like blood in the flickering emergency lights that had kicked on after the shooting started. The lead attacker stumbled back, and Clara used those precious seconds to sprint toward the kitchen doors, grabbing Ethan Voss by his designer collar as she passed his table. "Move!" she snarled. For once in his life, the billionaire who thought he ruled the world obeyed without question. He stumbled after her, Gerald Marsh crawling behind them, as Clara hauled them through the kitchen doors. James slammed the doors shut behind them, and Clara grabbed a rolling steel cart, wedging it against the handles. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might hold long enough. The kitchen was chaos. 40 people crammed into a space designed for 12, all talking, crying, some in shock, some on phones trying to call 911. The chefs stood by their stations in stunned silence, their perfect meals abandoned, smoke rising from a pan someone had forgotten. Clara's training kicked in automatically. Everyone to the back. There's a service exit. Stay away from the windows. Someone call 911 if you haven't already. You, and you. She pointed at 3 men who looked relatively calm. Help me barricade these doors. They moved to obey, still not entirely sure who this waitress was or why they were listening to her, but responding to the tone of absolute authority in her voice. Ethan Voss stared at her with something like awe. Who the hell are you? Clara didn't answer. She was counting in her head, calculating. 5 attackers, 2 down, incapacitated by her improvised weapons, 3 still active. They'd regroup in approximately 90 seconds, maybe less if they were military trained. The kitchen door would hold for maybe 3 minutes under sustained assault. The service exit led to an alley, but if the attackers had done their homework, and they clearly had, there'd be someone covering that exit too. They were trapped. The kitchen doors shuddered as something heavy slammed into them from the other side. The steel cart screeched against the floor, holding but barely. We're going to die here, Gerald Marsh whimpered. Clara looked at the assembled crowd, at the frightened faces of people who'd never expected their expensive dinner to turn into a war zone. She thought about Beirut, about the ambush she'd failed to prevent, about the 3 people who'd died because she'd missed the signs. She thought about this black van she'd seen outside, about the missing bodyguard, about all the little warnings her instincts had screamed that she'd tried to ignore because she just wanted to be normal, wanted to be invisible, wanted to be anyone but the soldier she'd been. No, Clara said quietly, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. We're not going to die here. She turned to James. How many exits from this kitchen? 3. Main doors that we came through, service exit to the alley, and... He paused, his eyes lighting up with understanding. The grease vent shaft that goes to the roof. Maintenance access. Clara's lips curved. Show me. Behind them, the kitchen doors shuddered again, harder this time. Wood splintered. Metal groaned. A voice shouted from the restaurant. You're just delaying the inevitable. Voss comes out, or everyone in there dies. You have 60 seconds to decide. Clara ignored them, following James to the back corner of the kitchen where a heavy steel grate covered a 3-foot-wide ventilation shaft. The smell of old grease and stale air wafted out. It goes straight up to the roof, James said. 4 stories. There's a ladder, but it's tight. Maybe 2 people at a time, Max. Clara did the math. 40 people, 2 at a time, approximately 3 minutes per pair to climb 4 stories of greasy ladder in the dark. 90 minutes minimum, probably longer with panic factored in. They didn't have 90 minutes. They had maybe 5. We can't evacuate everyone, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Another failure. Another group of people she couldn't save. So what do we do? Voss asked, and Clara was surprised to hear actual fear in his voice. The man who'd sat calmly while being threatened with execution was now realizing that money couldn't buy him out of this particular problem. Clara looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time. She saw a man who'd built an empire by being smarter, faster, more ruthless than his competitors. A man who'd probably never been in a physical fight in his life, never had to think about anything more threatening than a hostile board meeting. A man who was, despite everything, still a human being who didn't deserve to be executed in a restaurant by vigilantes seeking revenge for corporate sins. They want you, Clara said bluntly. This whole thing is about you, about Thorn Industries, about revenge. They're not going to leave until they have you. So give me to them, Voss said, and Clara was even more surprised to hear actual courage in his words. If that's what ends this, if that saves these people. Noble, Clara interrupted. Stupid, but noble. They'll kill you, then kill everyone anyway to eliminate witnesses. These aren't the kind of people who leave loose ends. The kitchen doors burst open, the steel cart finally giving way. The lead attacker stepped through, weapon raised, flanked by his 2 remaining men. The pepper spray victims had recovered enough to rejoin the attack, their eyes still streaming but their weapons steady. 5 again. All of them focused on the huddled crowd in the kitchen. "Last chance," the lead attacker said. "Voss steps forward, or I start shooting civilians. We'll do this alphabetically, I think. Who wants to be first? You, in the Armani? You look like your name might be Aaron something. Step forward, Aaron." A man in his 30s, tears streaming down his face, began to stand. His wife grabbed his arm, sobbing, but he gently pulled away, preparing to die to buy a few more minutes for everyone else. Clara felt something inside her crack and break and reform into something harder. She'd spent 6 years running from who she'd been, trying to bury the soldier, trying to pretend that part of her life was over. But maybe that had been the mistake all along. Maybe you couldn't run from who you were. Maybe you could only choose whether to use it for good or evil, for protection or destruction. Maybe invisible had never been the answer. "Wait," Clara said, stepping forward into the light, drawing every eye in the room. "You want Voss? You're going to have to go through me to get him." The lead attacker laughed, a sound without humor. "You? The waitress who got lucky with a serving tray? Sweetheart, I've killed people more dangerous than you before breakfast." Clara met his eyes through his ski mask, and something in her gaze made his laughter die. "No," she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "You haven't." And then, before anyone could move, before her rational mind could talk her out of it, before fear could freeze her like it had frozen everyone else, Clara Chen, who'd been trying to be Clara Novak, trying to be invisible, trying to be small, did something that would change everything. She attacked. Her body moved before conscious thought could interfere. 6 years of muscle memory overriding 6 years of deliberately trying to forget. Claire's first strike was a feint, a high kick that drew the lead attacker's weapon up to block, while her real attack came low and fast, a sweep that caught his ankle and sent him stumbling backward into his nearest companion. The kitchen exploded into motion. People screamed and scattered, diving behind steel prep tables and industrial ovens. The second attacker tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Clara was already inside his guard, her elbow connecting with his throat in a strike that cut off his air and his consciousness simultaneously. He dropped like a puppet with severed strings. "Get down!" Clara roared at the civilians, her voice carrying the absolute authority of command that she'd sworn she'd never use again. "Behind the counters, now!" They moved. Even Ethan Voss, a man accustomed to giving orders rather than taking them, threw himself behind a stainless steel island without hesitation. The third attacker opened fire, bullets sparking off metal surfaces, shattering glass, punching holes through hanging copper pots that rang like broken bells. Clara grabbed a massive cast-iron skillet from a nearby stove, still hot from cooking, she'd regret this later, if there was a later, and used it as a shield, deflecting rounds in a shower of sparks that would have been beautiful if they weren't trying to kill her. She closed the distance between them in 3 running steps, slammed the skillet into his weapon, sent it clattering across the tile floor, then brought the pan back around in a backhand strike that connected with his masked face. The crack of breaking bone echoed over the screaming. 3 down. The lead attacker had recovered his balance and his weapon. He fired, controlled bursts, professional and precise. Clara dove behind a prep table, felt bullets whip past her head so close they stirred her hair, heard them punch through steel and explode bags of flour into white clouds that filled the air like snow. "You're good," the attacker called out, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect beneath the rage. "Military, private security, doesn't matter. You're one person against 5 of us, and you can't save everyone." He was right. Clara's mind raced through tactical assessments, calculating odds and outcomes. The 4th and 5th attackers had recovered from her pepper spray assault and were moving to flank her position. In 30 seconds, they'd have her in a crossfire with no cover. She could maybe take one more before they brought her down, but that still left 3 armed men and 40 unarmed civilians. The math was brutal and unforgiving, unless she changed the equation. "James!" Clara shouted to the bartender-turned-Marine who was crouched behind a pizza oven, his chef's knife gripped in white-knuckled hands. "The grease traps! Where's the shutoff?" He understood immediately, his eyes widening. "Clara, no, if you ignite that much grease—" "Where?" "Panel by the dishwasher. Red valve, but—" Clara was already moving, staying low, using the thick white cloud of flour dust as cover. Bullets tracked her movement, tearing through the fog, but she was a shadow, a ghost, impossible to pin down. She reached the panel, yanked it open, and spun the red valve all the way to the right. The change was immediate. The powerful ventilation system that normally sucked cooking smoke and grease-laden air up through the vents suddenly reversed, pumping everything back down into the kitchen. The air grew thick, oily, hard to breathe. The hanging grease traps, designed to capture aerosolized cooking oil before it clogged the ventilation system, began to drip their captured contents like rain. "What are you doing?" the lead attacker demanded, coughing as the air quality deteriorated. "You'll kill everyone in here?" "Maybe," Clara said, grabbing a blowtorch used for creme brulee from a nearby station. "Or maybe I'm changing the odds." She didn't give him time to understand. She lit the blowtorch, held it high, and touched the blue flame to the grease-saturated air. The world turned to fire. The grease vapor ignited in a rolling wave of flame that raced across the ceiling like liquid light, beautiful and terrifying. It wasn't an explosion. Clara had calculated that, had known exactly how much oxygen saturation was needed for flame versus detonation, but it was enough to turn the kitchen into something out of Dante's nightmares. The attackers screamed, stumbling backward, weapons forgotten as they batted at flames that licked at their tactical gear. The fire suppression system kicked in, commercial-grade sprinklers dumping thousands of gallons of chemical suppressant that mixed with the flour dust to create a thick, choking fog. And in that chaos, Clara moved like vengeance herself. She grabbed a heavy stockpot, swung it like a medieval flail, connected with the fourth attacker's head with a sound like a church bell tolling. He went down and stayed down. She spun, drove her elbow into the fifth attacker's solar plexus, stole his weapon as he gasped for air, used it to pistol whip him into unconsciousness. 4 down, 1 to go. The lead attacker had found cover behind the walk-in freezer, his weapon trained on the huddled civilians. Through the fog and flame and falling chemical rain, his voice carried clear and cold. "Enough!" he roared. "I'll kill them! I swear to God, I'll kill everyone in this room before I let you stop this." Clara froze, the stolen weapon heavy in her hands. She could see him through the chaos, finger on the trigger, weapon aimed at a group of people who'd never asked to be part of this war. She could maybe take the shot, maybe put him down before he could fire, but maybe wasn't good enough when innocent lives hung in the balance. "This isn't about them," Clara said, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is about Voss, about revenge for Walter Thorne, about a man who killed himself because his life's work was destroyed. I understand that. I understand wanting justice when the system fails." "Do you?" The attacker's voice cracked with emotion. "Do you understand watching your father put a gun in his mouth because people like Voss destroyed everything he built? Do you understand that kind of pain?" Clara thought about Beirut, about the ambush she'd failed to prevent, about holding dying friends while she bled out herself, about 6 years of nightmares and guilt, and trying to be someone smaller because being who she was had cost too much. "Yes," she said quietly. "I understand." The attacker's weapon wavered, just for a second, just long enough for Clara to see the human being beneath the mask, the grieving son driven by pain into something monstrous, but not long enough for her to stop what happened next. Ethan Voss stood up. "Wait," the billionaire said, his voice surprisingly steady. "This is my fault, my responsibility. If someone has to pay, it should be me." "Voss, don't!" Clara started, but he cut her off with a gesture that was pure CEO, pure command, as if this were a boardroom and not a war zone. "I knew what I was doing when I went after Thorne Industries," Voss continued, walking slowly toward the attacker, his hands raised. "I knew it would cost jobs, destroy lives, hurt people. I told myself it was just business, just optimization, just the natural evolution of markets. But Walter Thorne killed himself because of my actions. That's on me. That's my responsibility." The attacker's weapon tracked Voss's movement, but he didn't fire. Clara could see the confusion in his body language, the sudden uncertainty of a man who'd expected a coward and found something else entirely. "You think I care about your regrets?" the attacker spat. "You think an apology brings my father back? He worked for 40 years to build that company. 40 years. And you destroyed it in 4 months for a 2-point increase in shareholder value. You're right, Voss said simply, and I'm sorry. It doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring him back, doesn't undo the harm, but I'm sorry. Clara watched, her weapon still trained on the attacker, but her mind racing. What was Voss doing? He had to know this wouldn't work, that revenge wasn't satisfied by apologies, that his death was already written in this man's heart. Unless Voss was buying time, drawing the attacker's attention, creating an opening. Clara understood, and her respect for the billionaire ticked up several notches. He might be ruthless in business, but he wasn't a coward, and he understood tactics better than she'd given him credit for. My father left a note, the attacker said, his voice breaking. He said he was sorry. Sorry he failed us. Sorry he wasn't strong enough. As if it was his fault. As if he was the problem. When it was people like you, parasites who see human beings as nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet. Take off your mask, Voss said quietly. If you're going to kill me, at least let me see the face of Walter Thorne's son. Let me know who I failed. The attacker hesitated. His free hand moved slowly to his ski mask, began to pull it up. And Clara moved. She crossed the 15 feet between them in less than 2 seconds, her body remembering every sprint drill, every combat simulation, every moment of training that had been burned into her muscle memory. The attacker saw her coming, tried to swing his weapon around, but he was half distracted by Voss, half blinded by tears and rage and grief. Clara's strike was precise and economical. She grabbed his weapon, twisted it away using a joint lock that would have made her combat instructor proud, swept his legs out from under him, and had him face down on the tile floor with her knee in his back before he could process what had happened. It's over, she said quietly, pulling zip ties from her belt. She'd grabbed them from a storage closet during the chaos, always planning 3 moves ahead. You don't have to die today. Your father wouldn't want that. You don't know what my father wanted, the attacker screamed, struggling against her hold. You don't know anything. I know grief, Clara said, her voice softening even as her grip remained iron. I know what it's like to lose people, to want someone to blame, to want the world to hurt as much as you hurt. But this isn't the answer. This isn't justice. This is just more death, more pain, more fathers not coming home to their families. She secured his hands behind his back, relieved him of his weapons and tactical gear, then hauled him to his feet. His mask had fallen away during the struggle, revealing a face that couldn't have been more than 30 years old, tear-streaked and twisted with anguish. Silas, he whispered. My name is Silas Thorne, and you should have let me finish it. Maybe, Clara acknowledged, but I've let too many things finish that should have been stopped. I'm done with that. The fire suppression system finally completed its work, the flames dying to smoldering embers, the fog beginning to clear. The kitchen looked like a war zone, scorched ceiling, destroyed equipment, flour and chemical suppressant coating every surface like snow. But everyone was alive. 40 civilians, 1 billionaire CEO, 1 ex-Marine bartender, and 5 attackers who would face justice in a courtroom instead of delivering it in a restaurant. Clara allowed herself one moment of relief before her training kicked back in. James, check the perimeter. If they had people outside, we need to know now. The bartender nodded, moving toward the service exit with the caution of a man who'd seen combat before. The other servers began helping people to their feet, checking for injuries, passing out water and clean towels. Ethan Voss approached Clara slowly, his expensive suit ruined, his face smudged with soot and flour, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. Thank you, he said simply. You saved my life. You saved everyone's lives. I don't even know your name. Clara, she said after a moment's hesitation. Clara Novak. Well, Clara Novak, I owe you everything. Name your price. Anything. $1 million? 10? Your own security company? Whatever you want, it's yours. Clara looked at him. At this man who thought every problem could be solved with money, who'd lived in a world where value was measured in stock prices and quarterly returns. She thought about telling him that some things couldn't be bought, that courage and conscience weren't commodities to be traded. But before she could speak, James burst back through the service exit, his face pale. Clara, We've got a problem. Her body tensed, ready for another attack. What kind of problem? The kind with a badge, James said grimly. NYPD Emergency Services Unit is setting up outside. Snipers on the surrounding buildings. Negotiators on loudspeakers. They think we're hostages and they think the attackers still have control of the building. Clara's mind raced. Of course. The police response would be massive for an attack on a high-end Manhattan restaurant, and from the outside, looking in through shattered windows at a smoke-filled building with armed people inside, it would be impossible to tell heroes from villains. We need to signal them, Clara said. White flag, hands up, clear communication that the threat is neutralized. Already thought of that, James said. But there's another problem. The black van that was waiting outside, it's gone. And so is Voss's bodyguard. Clara felt ice slide down her spine. Marcus Webb, the mountain of a man who was supposed to be protecting Ethan Voss, missing since before the attack began. A black van with a running engine, waiting for something. And now both were gone, disappeared into the Manhattan night. Inside job, she said flatly. Webb sold you out, Voss. Someone paid him to leave you exposed. The billionaire's face went white, then red with fury. That's impossible. Marcus has been with me for 6 years. He's loyal. He's gone, Clara interrupted. And 5 men knew exactly where you'd be, exactly when, exactly how to get past your security. That doesn't happen without inside information. Voss sank onto a steel prep table, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. My head of security betrayed me. For what? Money? Revenge? Maybe both, Clara said. She looked at Silas Thorne, still zip-tied and slumped against a wall. Who hired you? Who organized this attack? Silas laughed bitterly. You think I'm going to tell you? You think I'm afraid of you? I think you're afraid of whoever put you up to this, Clara said quietly, because this operation was too clean, too professional. You had inside intelligence, tactical training, coordinated timing. That takes resources and expertise. So, who provided them? Silas's eyes flicked away, just for a second, but it was enough. Clara saw fear there beneath the grief and rage. They'll kill my family if I talk, he whispered. My mother, my sisters. They were very clear about that. Clara knelt down beside him, her voice gentle now. Then help me stop them. Help me make sure this ends tonight, that no one else's father gets hurt, that your family stays safe. Because right now, whoever organized this, they're going to tie up loose ends, and you're a loose end, Silas. The young man's face crumbled. I just wanted justice. I just wanted him to pay for what he did to my father. I know, Clara said, but revenge isn't justice, and now you're caught in something bigger than that. So help me end it. A long moment passed, filled only with the drip of water from the suppression system and the distant wail of police sirens. Then Silas took a shuddering breath. His name is Frank Miller. He was some kind of security consultant. He approached me 3 months ago, said he could help me get to Voss, make him pay. Said he had a personal grudge too, that Voss had betrayed him somehow. He provided the weapons, the training, the intel about the restaurant, and the muscle. The other 4 guys, they're contractors, ex-military, hired guns. Frank Miller. Clara filed the name away, already running through possibilities. But before she could ask more questions, a voice boomed from outside, amplified by a police megaphone. This is the New York Police Department. We have the building surrounded. Release the hostages and come out with your hands up. You have 60 seconds to comply. Clara stood, her mind shifting gears. Immediate threat. The police thinking they were the bad guys. Secondary threat. Frank Miller and Marcus Webb, somewhere in Manhattan with inside knowledge and unknown intentions. Tertiary threat. Getting 40 traumatized civilians safely out of a building that the NYPD probably had surrounded with enough firepower to level a small country. Okay, she said, her voice calm and clear. Here's what we're going to do. James, you're going to go out first. Hands up, no weapons. Identify yourself as a Marine veteran and an employee. That'll give you credibility with the ESU guys. Tell them the situation is under control. Threats neutralized, casualties minimal. James nodded. Got it. What about you? I'm going to make sure everyone gets out safely, including our prisoners. She looked at Voss. You're going to need to make a statement. Tell them exactly what happened, that I'm not a threat. Consider it done, Voss said. But Clara, about this Frank Miller, one crisis at a time, Clara interrupted. First we get everyone to safety. Then we figure out who betrayed you and why. She turned to the assembled crowd. These men and women in expensive clothes who'd come for Michelin-starred cuisine and gotten a war zone instead. They looked at her with a mixture of fear, awe, and desperate hope. Listen carefully, Clara said. When we go outside, the police are going to be on high alert. Weapons drawn, possibly armored vehicles, definitely a lot of shouting. You're going to do exactly what they say. Hands up, move slowly, don't make any sudden movements. Some of you will be separated for questioning. That's normal. Just tell the truth about what happened here. What about you? A woman in a torn Chanel dress asked. Who are you? How did you know how to do all this? Clara hesitated. 6 years of trying to be invisible, trying to be nobody, trying to bury the soldier she'd been, and now 40 witnesses who'd seen exactly who she really was. I'm someone who was in the right place at the right time, she said finally. That's all. That's not all, Ethan Voss said quietly. That's not even close to all, but we can discuss it later, after we survive the next 60 seconds. The police loudspeaker crackled again. 30 seconds. Anyone still inside will be considered hostile. James, go, Clara ordered. Now. The bartender moved to the service exit, opened it slowly, stepped out into the night with his hands raised high. Clara watched through the doorway as red laser sights immediately painted his chest as tactical officers swarmed forward, weapons drawn. Don't shoot! Don't shoot! James was shouting. I'm James Chen, employee of the restaurant, former Marine. The attackers are subdued. Repeat, the attackers are subdued. We have civilians inside who need medical attention. The red dot stayed on him, but no one fired. Clara heard shouted commands, saw James slowly lower himself to his knees, hands still raised, allowing officers to approach and secure him. It was the right protocol. By the book. No surprises. Okay, Clara said to the others. One at a time, hands up, move slow. When they tell you to stop, you stop. When they tell you to get down, you get down. No heroes, no arguments. Understood? 40 heads nodded. Clara began sending them out one by one, spacing them far enough apart that the police could secure each person before the next one appeared. It was textbook hostage release, and she could see the ESU officers beginning to relax slightly as they realized this was an evacuation, not a trap. Ethan Voss went out 10th, his hands raised, his voice carrying his name and status. The police response intensified. Of course, they'd mobilized extra resources for a billionaire victim. Clara saw him immediately surrounded by officers, being led to a waiting ambulance despite his protests that he was fine. Gerald Marsh went out 23rd, still shaking, tears streaming down his face. The other diners followed, some walking on their own, others supported by friends or strangers who'd become brothers in arms through shared trauma. Finally, only Clara and the 5 subdued attackers remained. She'd zip-tied all of them, checked them for concealed weapons, kept them separated so they couldn't coordinate any kind of last-minute resistance. They were broken men now. Their mission failed. Their leader in custody, facing decades in prison for attempted murder and armed assault. Your turn, Clara said to Silas Thorne. And remember, you want to stay alive to testify against Miller. You cooperate fully with the police. Tell them everything. Don't hold back to protect anyone because Miller isn't going to protect you. Silas nodded wearily. What about you? What happens to the waitress who took down 5 armed men? I'll answer their questions and then I'll go home, Clara said, just like everyone else. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Nothing would ever be just like before. She'd broken her carefully constructed cover of invisibility. 40 witnesses had seen Captain Clara Chen emerge from the shell of Clara Novak, the waitress. There was no going back to normal because normal had just been obliterated along with the restaurant's wine collection. She sent the attackers out one by one, each one immediately swarmed by ESU officers who secured them with professional efficiency. Finally, Clara stood alone in the ruined kitchen, surrounded by scorched equipment and the lingering smell of grease and chemical suppressant and gunpowder. She took one deep breath, then stepped out into the night. The scene outside was chaos organized into military precision. Police vehicles blocked every approach to the restaurant, their lights painting the wet streets in alternating red and blue. Armored ESU trucks squatted like metal beetles, snipers visible on rooftops, tactical officers creating perimeters within perimeters. Ambulances lined Park Avenue, paramedics treating shocked civilians wrapped in thermal blankets. And every weapon, every laser sight, every pair of professional eyes swung to point at Clara as she emerged with her hands raised. "I'm Clara Novak, employee of the restaurant," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "I'm unarmed. The scene is secure." A dozen officers swarmed her immediately, hands firm but not rough, weapons trained but fingers off triggers. They knew what they were doing, and Clara let them do it. She allowed herself to be searched, cuffed as a precaution, led to a police vehicle while a sergeant barked questions. "Are you injured? How many attackers? Any explosives? Any additional threats? Where's your ID?" Clara answered each question calmly and precisely, her military training making her the ideal witness. She gave them numbers, descriptions, positions, everything they needed to secure the scene and begin their investigation. And slowly, as her answers matched the stories of other witnesses, as James Chen vouched for her, as Ethan Voss himself insisted that she'd saved his life, the handcuffs came off and the tone shifted from suspect to hero. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his face a mixture of confusion and respect, "I'm going to need you to stay available for a full statement. What you did in there, that wasn't normal civilian behavior. You have training, military, law enforcement." "I'd prefer not to discuss my background right now," Clara said carefully. "I just did what anyone would do." "Anyone?" The sergeant laughed without humor. "Ma'am, I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone take down 5 armed attackers with kitchen equipment and a blowtorch. So no, not anyone. You're something special." Special. The word tasted like ash in Clara's mouth. She'd been special once, before Beirut, before the ambush, before everything went wrong. Being special had gotten people killed. Being invisible had been so much safer. But tonight, being special had saved 40 lives. Before she could respond, Ethan Voss pushed through the crowd of police and paramedics, ignoring the protests of an EMT who was trying to check his vitals. He stopped in front of Clara, his soot-stained face intense. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "About Frank Miller, about Marcus Webb, about why someone went to this much trouble to try to kill me. Because this isn't over, Clara. This was just the opening move." Clara looked at him, at this billionaire who'd built his empire on ruthless efficiency and was now learning that sometimes the things you destroy come back with weapons. She thought about saying no, about walking away, about returning to her invisible life. But the black van was still out there. Marcus Webb was still out there. And Frank Miller, whoever he was, had organized a military-grade assault on a Manhattan restaurant. Men like that didn't give up after one failure. They adapted, evolved, came back harder, and Clara had just painted a target on her own back by stopping them. "Later," she told Voss, "after the police finish with us, after we're somewhere secure, after—" She stopped. A black SUV had pulled up at the edge of the police perimeter, its engine running, its windows tinted dark. As Clara watched, the rear window rolled down just enough for her to see a face inside. A face she didn't recognize, but that radiated menace like heat from a fire. The SUV's headlights flashed twice, some kind of signal. Then it smoothly pulled away, disappearing into the Manhattan night as if it had never existed. Clara's blood turned to ice. They'd been watching, waiting to see if the attack succeeded. And now they knew it had failed, knew who had stopped it, knew exactly what Clara looked like. "Voss," she said quietly, her eyes still tracking where the SUV had disappeared. "You're right. This isn't over, and we need to talk. Tonight. Somewhere private. Somewhere secure." "My building," Voss said immediately. "Penthouse level. Full security, controlled access. No one gets in without clearance." Clara almost laughed. "Your security just tried to kill you. You really want to trust them with your life right now?" Voss's face hardened. "Point taken. Where then?" Clara thought fast. Somewhere public enough to make an attack difficult, private enough to talk freely, secure enough that they'd see threats coming, and somewhere that wasn't connected to either of their normal lives, because normal had just become dangerous. "Grand Central Terminal," she said. "Main concourse. Public. Cameras everywhere, multiple exits. Meet me there in 2 hours. Come alone, no security, no assistance. If someone's tracking you, we need to know. 2 hours, Voss agreed. And Clara? Thank you. For everything. For saving my life, for showing me that courage looks like. He walked away before she could respond, surrounded by police and paramedics and assistants with phones pressed to their ears, already managing the crisis, already controlling the narrative. Clara watched him go, this man who'd built an empire and was now learning what it cost. The sergeant returned, notepad in hand, ready to take her formal statement. Clara gave it to him, every detail precise and accurate, holding back only one thing, the black SUV at the perimeter, the watching face, the flashing headlights. That piece of information felt too dangerous to share, too vulnerable. The police would launch an investigation, make reports, follow procedures. But procedures took time, and whoever was behind this would be moving fast. It took 90 minutes for the police to finish with her, checking her story against others, verifying details, taking photographs of her injuries. She hadn't even realized she'd been cut by flying glass until someone pointed out the blood. The cuts were superficial, barely worth bandaging, but they documented them anyway. Evidence for the trial that would eventually put Silas Thorne and his crew away for attempted murder. Finally, they let her go. Clara limped toward the subway, her ankle hurt from all the combat rolls, another injury she'd ignored in the moment, and disappeared into the underground warren of tunnels that connected Manhattan like arteries. She changed trains twice, doubled back once, used every counter-surveillance technique she'd been taught to make sure no one was following her. The whole time, her mind was racing. Frank Miller, Marcus Webb, a black SUV with watching eyes. An attack that was too professional, too coordinated, too well-informed to be just about revenge. There were layers here, conspiracies within conspiracies, and she just stumbled into the middle of them by doing what she did best, protecting people who needed protecting. Grand Central Terminal blazed with light when she emerged from the subway tunnel. Even at this hour, the main concourse was busy. Late trains, early commuters, tourists taking photos of the famous ceiling, homeless people sleeping in corners that security hadn't yet cleared. The perfect place to disappear into the crowd while still being completely visible. Clara found a position with her back to a wall and clear sight lines to all entrances. Her training was fully active now, the invisible waitress gone, the soldier returned. She cataloged threats automatically. That man with the bulky jacket, that woman who kept checking her phone, that pair of teenagers who moved too purposefully for casual tourists. None of them were threats. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives in a city that had no idea how close it had come to tragedy tonight. Ethan Voss appeared exactly 2 hours after their conversation, entering through the Vanderbilt Avenue entrance, alone as instructed. He'd changed clothes, jeans, a plain black sweater, a baseball cap pulled low. Without the expensive suit and the aura of wealth, he looked almost normal. Almost. Clara watched him scan the concourse, searching for her, and she used the time to check for tails. No one seemed to be following him. No one seemed to be paying him any attention at all. She stepped out of the shadows. Over here. Voss startled, then walked toward her, his relief evident. I wasn't sure you'd come. I thought maybe… Talk, Clara interrupted. We don't have much time. Tell me everything you know about Frank Miller. Voss's expression darkened as they moved to a more secluded corner of the terminal, near a closed newsstand where the shadows were deeper and conversation wouldn't carry. His hands were shaking slightly, Clara noticed, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving raw fear in its wake. Frank Miller was my head of corporate security for 12 years, Voss began, his voice low and tight. I hired him after the Sanderson acquisition. There were death threats, protests, attempts to sabotage the deal. Frank handled it all. Ex-CIA, or so he claimed. He had connections everywhere, could make problems disappear before they became public. I trusted him with everything, my schedule, my family's safety, my most sensitive business dealings. Past tense, Clara noted. Was your head of security. What happened? Voss's jaw clenched. 6 months ago, I discovered he'd been skimming money from the security budget. Not a lot, relatively speaking, maybe $200,000 over 3 years. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the betrayal, the audacity. I confronted him privately, gave him a chance to resign quietly, keep his reputation intact. Instead, he threatened me. Said I didn't know who I was dealing with, that I'd regret destroying his career. And you fired him anyway, Clara said. It wasn't a question. I had him escorted out by his own security team, Voss admitted, and there was something like shame in his voice. Made it as humiliating as possible. A message to everyone else who worked for me. Loyalty is rewarded, betrayal is crushed. I thought that was the end of it. Frank disappeared and I replaced him with Marcus Webb. Clara felt the pieces clicking together like a puzzle made of razor blades. Webb was Miller's recommendation? His replacement, actually. Frank's second in command, promoted to fill the position. Marcus seemed loyal, competent, exactly what I needed. I never suspected... Voss's voice broke. God, I was so stupid. Miller must have been planning this for months. Leave his own man in place, feed him intelligence, wait for the perfect moment to strike. The attack tonight wasn't just about revenge for Walter Thorne, Clara said, her mind racing through tactical implications. Silas and his crew were the distraction, the visible threat. But if Miller wanted you dead, there are easier ways, quieter ways. A billionaire CEO gets killed in a restaurant siege. It becomes an international incident, massive investigation, no stone left unturned. Miller's too smart for that. Then what was tonight about? Voss demanded, frustration and fear making his voice sharp. If not to kill me, then what? Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a billionaire but a chess piece being moved around a board he couldn't see. Information, access. Tonight was a test, a way to see your security response, identify weaknesses, force you into a vulnerable position. The attack fails, but now Miller knows exactly how you react under pressure, who you trust, how your security protocols work. And more importantly, she stopped, a chill running down her spine as another piece clicked into place. More importantly, what? Voss pressed. More importantly, he knows about me now, Clara finished quietly. I wasn't supposed to be there. A waitress with military training who can take down 5 armed men? That's not in anyone's playbook. I'm an unknown variable, and that makes me dangerous to whatever Miller's really planning. As if to punctuate her words, Clara's borrowed phone, she'd left her own at the restaurant, probably in evidence bags by now, buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. She opened it, and her blood turned to ice. The message was simple. A photograph of her apartment building taken from street level. No words, no threats. Just the image. The implication clear as a knife blade. They knew where she lived. They were watching. What is it? Voss asked, seeing her face go pale. Clara showed him the phone. They're escalating, fast. This isn't just about you anymore. Miller's making sure I know I'm a target too. Then we go to the police, Voss said immediately. Show them the photo, tell them everything, get protection. Protection from what? Clara interrupted. A photograph? Miller hasn't made any explicit threats, and the NYPD is stretched thin dealing with tonight's attack. By the time they could provide meaningful security, Miller will have moved again. We're on our own. So what do we do? The fear in Voss's voice was naked now, all his billionaire confidence stripped away. Just wait for him to try again? Hide? Run? His mind was already working through options, discarding bad ones, weighing risks and outcomes with the cold precision of her training. Running was tempting but futile. Miller had resources, connections, time. Hiding was temporary at best. Going to the police would tie them up in bureaucracy, while Miller operated in the shadows, which left only one real option. We go on offense, Clara said quietly. We find Miller before he finds us, figure out what he's really after, and we stop him, permanently. How? Voss asked. The man's a ghost. After I fired him, he vanished. No forwarding address, no paper trail, nothing. I had my people look. Trust me, when you have my resources, you can find almost anyone. But Frank Miller, it's like he never existed. Everyone exists somewhere, Clara said. Everyone leaves traces. Miller was your head of security for 12 years. He had routines, contacts, places he went. Think, Voss. Where would he go to ground? Who would he turn to? Voss closed his eyes, thinking. The terminal around them continued its late-night ballet, trains arriving and departing, footsteps echoing on marble, the distant crackle of PA announcements. Normal life continuing while they stood in the shadows planning a counterattack against a man who'd tried to have them killed. There was a warehouse, Voss said finally, opening his eyes. In Red Hook, Brooklyn. Miller used it as a training facility for security personnel. Mock-ups of different scenarios, shooting range, tactical equipment storage. After I fired him, I sold the property to recoup costs, but the new owners haven't done anything with it yet. If Miller needed a base of operations somewhere off the books with equipment already in place, that's where we start, Clara finished. She checked her watch, almost midnight. We go now, while it's dark, while Miller thinks we're still reacting instead of acting. You know the address? I can find it, Voss said, already pulling out his phone. But Clara, we can't just walk into a potential hostile facility alone. We need backup, weapons, a plan. We need surprise, Clara corrected. And we need to move before Miller realizes we're not playing defense anymore. You want to live through the night? You want to stop looking over your shoulder? Then we do this now, and we do it my way. Voss stared at her for a long moment. This woman who'd been his invisible waitress just hours ago and was now proposing to lead him into a tactical assault on a fortified position. Clara could see him weighing his options, his business mind calculating odds and outcomes. Why are you doing this? He asked finally. You could walk away, change your name again, disappear, let me deal with my own problems. You don't owe me anything. Clara thought about that black SUV outside the restaurant, about the photograph of her apartment building, about 6 years of trying to hide from who she was. She thought about the 3 people who died in Beirut because she'd hesitated, second-guessed, failed to act when action was needed. Because I'm tired of running, she said simply. And because no one else is going to die on my watch. Not if I can help it. Voss nodded slowly, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, trust, the kind of bond that forms between people who've survived violence together. Okay. Your way. What do you need from me? Transportation, untraceable if possible. Cash, at least $5,000. And anything you remember about the warehouse layout, entrances, security systems, weak points. Done. Voss was already moving, leading her toward the terminal's main exit. I keep a car garage 2 blocks from here, registered to a shell company. Cash isn't a problem, and I've got the original architectural plans on my cloud storage. We can review them on the way. They emerged onto 42nd Street, the night air cold and damp with lingering rain. The city was quieter now, the pre-midnight rush fading into the deep night lull before the city woke again for another day. Clara's senses were hyper-alert, cataloging every face, every vehicle, every potential threat. A cab rolled past, normal. 2 teenagers arguing on the corner, normal. A delivery truck double-parked outside a bodega, normal. And a black motorcycle with its lights off, sitting in a bus zone across the street, very much not normal. Don't look, Clara said quietly, gripping Voss's arm to keep him walking at a steady pace. Motorcycle at 10 o'clock, rider watching us. Could be coincidence. Or could be Miller's people, Voss finished, his voice tight. Keep walking, natural pace. If they make a move, I need you to run. Get to the car and drive. Don't wait for me. Like hell I'm leaving you. You're the target, Voss. If you're safe, I can maneuver. If I have to protect you while fighting, we both die. Understand? They'd reached the corner now, waiting for the light to change. Clara used the reflection in a shop window to watch the motorcycle. The rider hadn't moved, but his head tracked their progress. Definitely surveillance, possibly more. The light changed. They crossed, and the motorcycle's engine suddenly roared to life. Run! Clara shouted, shoving Voss forward as the motorcycle jumped the curb, heading straight for them with deadly intent. The rider's hand reached inside his jacket, and Clara's training screamed danger even before she saw the weapon emerge. Voss sprinted toward a parking garage entrance, his survival instinct finally overriding his CEO's need to control everything. Clara grabbed a metal trash can from the sidewalk. New York City trash cans were heavy, solid, designed to withstand everything from weather to vandalism, and hurled it directly into the motorcycle's path. The rider tried to swerve, but at that speed, physics was unforgiving. The front wheel caught the trash can, the bike went down in a screaming shower of sparks and debris, and the rider was thrown clear, tumbling across wet concrete. Clara was on him before he could recover, her knee in his back, his weapon, a compact Glock 19, skittering away across the pavement. She grabbed his helmet, twisted it to limit his vision, and pressed her forearm against the back of his neck in a control hold that would cut blood flow to his brain if he struggled. "Who sent you?" she demanded. "Miller? Webb? Who?" The rider thrashed, trying to throw her off, but Clara had 50 pounds of leverage and 6 years of hand-to-hand combat training. She increased pressure, felt him start to weaken as oxygen deprivation took its toll. "Last chance," she said coldly. "Talk or sleep. Your choice." "Miller," the rider gasped. "Frank Miller. Said to follow the billionaire. Photograph you, report location." "Where is he? Where's Miller operating from?" "Don't know. He calls us burner phones, different locations. Tonight was Red Hook. That's all I know." "Please." Claire released pressure slightly, enough to let him breathe but not enough to let him escape. She could hear sirens now. Someone had called the cops about the motorcycle crash. She had maybe 90 seconds before this turned into another police incident. "The warehouse in Red Hook," Clara said. "Is that where Miller is right now?" "Was there hour ago. Don't know if still. He moves around. Please, I'm just a contractor, just doing a job." Clara made a decision. She released the rider, grabbed his Glock, ejected the magazine, and cleared the chamber with practiced efficiency, then threw all the pieces in different directions. The rider scrambled to his feet, saw her cold expression, and ran without looking back, leaving his damaged motorcycle smoking on the sidewalk. Voss emerged from the parking garage, his face pale. "Did you just let him go?" "He's nobody," Clara said, already moving toward the garage. "Just hired muscle." But he confirmed Miller was at the Red Hook warehouse, which means we're on the right track. "Come on, we need to move before the police arrive." They found Voss's car on the 3rd level, a nondescript Honda Accord, the kind of vehicle that would disappear in traffic. Smart. Clara approved of his thinking. Voss drove while Clara used his phone to pull up the architectural plans, studying entrances and exits, memorizing the layout, planning approach vectors and fallback positions. The warehouse was a converted industrial space near the waterfront, 3 stories of brick and steel that had once housed shipping equipment and now sat mostly empty, waiting for the Brooklyn real estate boom to make it valuable enough to redevelop. According to the plans, there were 4 entrances: main loading dock, personnel door on the east side, fire escape on the west, and a rooftop access hatch. "How many people would Miller have, see?" Clara asked, still studying the plans. "For an operation like tonight, he'd need support staff, weapons, communications, logistics. Minimum crew size?" "Frank always worked lean," Voss said, navigating through late-night traffic with surprising skill. 5 to 8 people max, all specialists. He believed small teams were more secure, harder to infiltrate or compromise. But each person would be highly trained, former military or intelligence. Not the kind of people you can take down with a serving tray. Clara smiled grimly. "Good thing I'm not planning to use serving trays this time. When we get there, you're staying in the car. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, drive to the nearest police station and tell them everything." "Absolutely not," Voss said flatly. "I'm not sending you in there alone. You're not sending me anywhere. I'm choosing to go. And you're choosing to stay alive by not following me into a tactical situation you're not trained for. Frank Miller wants you dead, Voss. Don't make it easy for him by playing hero." They drove in tense silence for several minutes, crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, its lights reflecting off the East River like fallen stars. The city looked almost beautiful from this angle, all gleaming towers and organized chaos, millions of people sleeping and dreaming and living their lives with no idea that violence moved through their streets like a ghost. "Tell me about Beirut," Voss said quietly. Clara's hands tightened on the phone. "What?" "You have training, obviously, combat experience, and the way you move tonight, the way you think. That's not private security, that's not police work. That's military, probably special operations. But something happened. Something that made you walk away and hide as a waitress in Manhattan. I'm guessing Beirut because that's where you went when you thought you were dying. Your accent slipped, your command tone changed. You were remembering something." Clara was silent for a long moment, watching the city slide past outside the window. She'd spent 6 years not talking about Beirut, not even in therapy, not even in the dark hours before dawn when the nightmares came. But Voss was right. He'd earned some truth. He'd stood up during the attack, created a distraction that let her move. He'd offered himself as a sacrifice to save civilians. Whatever else he had courage. I was protective detail for a diplomatic convoy, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Embassy personnel, high-value targets, moving through contested territory. We had intelligence saying the route was clear. It wasn't. IED took out the lead vehicle, small arms fire from 3 positions, classic ambush setup. I made the call to push forward instead of retreat. 3 people died, including my CO, who tried to shield me from a grenade because he thought I could save the others. But you survived, Voss said. I survived, Claire agreed bitterly. Spent 4 months in a military hospital, another 2 in psychiatric evaluation. They said I made the right call, that pushing forward was textbook for that scenario, that the intelligence failure wasn't my fault. But 3 people were dead, and all the textbooks and evaluations in the world couldn't change that. So I took an honorable discharge, changed my name, came to New York, and tried to be someone who couldn't fail to protect anyone because she wasn't protecting anyone at all. How'd that work out? Voss asked gently. Clara laughed, a sound without humor. Turns out you can't hide from who you are. The training doesn't go away. The instincts don't shut off. Tonight proved that. The moment violence started, I was right back in it, making the same kinds of calls, taking the same kinds of risks. Except this time everyone lived, Voss finished. You saved 40 people, Clara. You saved me. That has to count for something. It counts for Frank Miller knowing I exist, Clara said. It counts for putting a target on my back. It counts for ending whatever chance I had at a normal life. So yeah, it counts, just not sure it counts the way you think. They'd reached Red Hook now, driving past shuttered warehouses and sleeping residential blocks. The gentrification of Brooklyn not quite reaching this industrial corner yet. The streets were dark, poorly lit, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions about trucks coming and going at odd hours. Perfect for someone like Miller, who needed to operate below the radar. There, Voss said, slowing the car. 3 blocks ahead. That's the warehouse. Clara studied the building through the windshield. It looked abandoned, no lights in the windows, no vehicles visible outside, no obvious signs of occupation. But her instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The building was too dark, too quiet, too perfectly abandoned. It felt like a trap. Drive past, she ordered. Don't slow down, don't stare. Natural pace. Voss obeyed and Clara used the pass to catalog details. Chain link fence with a gate that looked locked but might not be. Loading dock doors closed but not obviously secured. A faint glow in a 3rd-floor window, barely visible, probably someone trying to remain covert. And on the roof, her breath caught. There, silhouetted against the city's ambient light, the outline of a satellite dish and what looked like radio antennas. Not standard equipment for an abandoned warehouse. Miller was here, or had been recently, and he was communicating with someone. Park 2 blocks away, Clara instructed. Somewhere with good visibility, multiple exit routes. Keep the engine running, doors unlocked, ready to move fast. Voss found a spot under a broken streetlight, another smart choice, and killed the headlights but left the engine idling quietly. Clara took a moment to center herself, to let her training fully take over, to become the weapon she'd been forged into before Beirut had broken her. 30 minutes, she reminded Voss. If I'm not back, drive away and call the police. Don't wait. Don't investigate. Don't try to rescue me. Just go. Promise me. I promise, Voss said, but Clara could see the lie in his eyes. He'd proven tonight that he was capable of courage even when it was stupid. She'd have to work fast. She slipped out of the car, a shadow among shadows, and moved toward the warehouse with the careful precision of a predator approaching prey. The streets were empty, the occasional distant sound of traffic the only sign of life. Clara used parked cars for cover, staying low, pausing frequently to listen and observe. The chain-link fence was her first obstacle. The gate was indeed locked, but the lock was cheap, probably meant more as a deterrent than actual security. Clara found a gap in the fence where age and weather had corroded the links, creating a hole just large enough to squeeze through if she didn't mind a few more cuts to add to her collection. She emerged on the other side in the warehouse's shadow, pressed against cold brick, controlling her breathing, waiting for any sign that she'd been detected. Nothing. No alarms, no lights, no sounds of movement. Either Miller's security was very good and she'd already been spotted, but they were waiting to see what she'd do, or they were overconfident, believing the warehouse's abandoned appearance was camouflage enough. Clara bet on overconfidence. Men like Miller, men who'd operated in the shadows for years, often forgot that other people had shadows too. She moved toward the personnel entrance on the east side, the one the plans had shown as least visible from the street. The door was steel, solid, but the lock was electronic. A numeric keypad, probably changed regularly. She studied it for a moment, then smiled grimly. The keypad was weathered, but 4 buttons showed slightly more wear than the others. Miller or his people had been using the same code long enough to leave traces. The 4 worn buttons were 2, 5, 7, and 9. Clara tried the most common sequence first, 5729. The lock clicked open. Too easy. Her instincts screamed warning even as she pushed the door open, leading with her body but keeping her weight back, ready to dodge. The interior was dark, smelling of rust and oil and something else, something wrong. Explosives. Clara threw herself backward as the tripwire she'd almost missed caught the door, and the small charge inside detonated with a flash of light and a sharp crack that echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Not enough to kill, just enough to announce an intruder and probably trigger an alarm system. Damn, Clara muttered, already moving, because stealth was over and now it was a race. She sprinted along the warehouse's exterior wall, heading for the fire escape, taking stairs 3 at a time, her injured ankle screaming protest, but her training overriding the pain. 2nd floor, 3rd floor, the rooftop access hatch just ahead. She could hear movement now inside the warehouse, shouts, the sound of weapons being readied. Clara grabbed the hatch handle, yanked it open, and rolled onto the roof just as gunfire erupted from below, bullets punching through the metal grating where she'd been standing. The roof was flat, studded with ventilation equipment and the communications gear she'd spotted from below. And standing near the satellite dish, weapon already drawn and pointing at her with steady precision, was Marcus Webb. "Hello, Captain Chen," the bodyguard said calmly, using her real name, her real rank. "Mr. Miller said you'd probably figure out where we were, said you were too smart and too stubborn to stay down. Looks like he was right." But Clara stayed low behind a ventilation unit, her mind racing. Webb had the advantage. High ground, weapon drawn, backup seconds away from joining him. She had surprise and desperation and 6 years of pent-up rage at herself for failing in Beirut. "Marcus," she said, keeping her voice level, "you don't have to do this. Whatever Miller's paying you, whatever he promised, it's not worth spending the rest of your life in prison. 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, federal charges, no parole. That's what you're looking at." "Miller's not paying me anything," Webb said, and there was something in his voice that made Clara's blood run cold. "I'm paying him. This whole operation, tonight's attack, all of it. I hired Frank to make it happen." Clara's mind reeled. "You? But why? What did Voss do to you?" Webb laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "What did he do? He built his empire on the corpses of better men. That's what he did. My brother worked for Sanderson Industries, gave them 20 years of his life. When Voss took over, when he optimized the company, my brother was part of the optimization. Fired at 53, pension dissolved, benefits terminated. He killed himself 6 months later. Jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge because a billionaire decided his quarterly returns mattered more than human lives. So you became his bodyguard to get close to him," Clara said, understanding now. "Spent 6 years planning revenge. Hired Miller to organize the attack, set up tonight as the opening move." "And you ruined it," Webb said, his weapon steady. "You and your hero complex. So now I have to clean up the mess. Starting with you, then finishing with Voss. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. Doesn't matter. I'll keep trying until it's done." "Then you'll have to shoot me," Clara said flatly. "Because I'm not letting you hurt anyone else." "I was hoping you'd say that," Webb replied, and his finger began to tighten on the trigger. Clara moved, throwing herself sideways as the gunshot cracked, rolling behind industrial equipment, her mind already calculating angles and options. She was unarmed, outgunned, on a rooftop with nowhere to run. This was Beirut all over again, except this time there was no backup coming, no extraction, no way out. Except this time, Clara wasn't the same person who'd frozen in Beirut. This time, she'd already died once in that dusty street and been reborn in the flames of a Manhattan kitchen. This time, she had nothing left to lose. She grabbed a length of steel pipe from the rooftop debris, construction materials left behind from some abandoned repair job, and hurled it at the satellite dish. The pipe struck with a metallic clang, and sparks exploded from the damaged equipment. Webb instinctively turned toward the noise, his weapon tracking the distraction, and Clara used those precious 2 seconds to close the distance between them. Her shoulder hit his midsection like a linebacker's tackle, driving them both backward toward the roof's edge. Webb was bigger, stronger, outweighed her by at least 80 pounds, but Clara had momentum and desperation and the absolute certainty that if she didn't end this now, Voss would die, more innocent people would die, and she'd have failed again. They grappled at the edge of the roof, 3 stories above concrete, the night air cold against Clara's face. Webb tried to bring his weapon around, but she grabbed his wrist, twisted it using a joint lock that would have broken bones if he hadn't been wearing tactical gloves. The gun discharged, the bullet going wild into the night sky, and then Clara brought her knee up hard into his ribs. Webb grunted, tried to throw her off, but Clara held on like a pit bull, her training and his size almost evenly matched. They rolled away from the edge, across tar paper and broken glass, both fighting for control of the weapon. Clara's wounded ankle gave out, sending a spike of white-hot agony up her leg, but she converted the stumble into a pivot, using Webb's own strength against him to slam him into a ventilation unit. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and Clara finally managed to wrench the weapon away. She rolled to her feet, the gun now in her hands, pointing at Webb's chest from 6 feet away. Her finger was on the trigger, her breathing controlled, every instinct screaming to end the threat permanently. "Don't move," she said, her voice deadly calm. "I will shoot you, Marcus. I don't want to, but I will." Webb slowly raised his hands, his face a mask of pain and rage. "You won't. You're one of the good guys, Captain Chen. Good guys don't execute unarmed prisoners." "I'm not a good guy anymore," Clara said quietly. "I'm just someone trying to stop bad things from happening. There's a difference." Behind her, the rooftop access hatch burst open, and 3 men emerged, Miller's contractors, weapons drawn, moving with professional coordination. Clara spun, her stolen weapon tracking between targets, her mind calculating odds that were brutally simple. 4 against 1, no cover, no backup, no way out. "Drop it," the lead contractor ordered. "Drop the weapon and step away from Webb, or we drop you. Your choice." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. She could maybe take 1, possibly 2 before they returned fire. But then she'd be dead, and Voss would be unprotected, and Webb would finish what he'd started. The math was unforgiving. She lowered the weapon slowly, set it on the rooftop, and raised her hands. The contractors moved in immediately, one grabbing her arms and zip-tying them behind her back, while the others kept their weapons trained on her. Professional, efficient, exactly what she'd expected from Miller's operation. "Search her," Webb ordered, getting to his feet with obvious pain. Clara's knee had done more damage than she'd thought. He was favoring his left side, breathing carefully like someone with cracked ribs. Phone, weapons, anything she might use. They found Voss's phone in her pocket, her makeshift wire cutter, and a small folding knife she'd taken from the restaurant kitchen. Not much of an arsenal, but they confiscated everything anyway. One of the contractors pulled her to her feet, his grip bruising, and shoved her toward the access hatch. "Miller's going to want to talk to you," Webb said, his voice tight with pain and satisfaction. "He's got questions about your background, your training, how much you've told the police, and you're going to answer them, Captain, one way or another." They dragged her down the stairs into the warehouse's 3rd floor, and Clara used the descent to memorize everything. 3 contractors plus Webb, all armed with Glock 19s, standard sidearms for private security. The 3rd floor was set up as a tactical operations center, folding tables covered with laptops and communications equipment, weapons lockers along the walls, maps of Manhattan marked with locations she recognized. Voss's apartment building, his office, his favorite restaurants. A kill box drawn in red marker around Le Bernardin Noir, and sitting at the central table, studying a laptop screen with the calm focus of a chess master planning 20 moves ahead, was Frank Miller. He looked nothing like Clara had expected. No tactical gear, no weapons visible, just a man in his early 50s wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of forgettable face that would disappear in any crowd. He could have been an accountant, a teacher, someone's friendly uncle. Except for his eyes, cold, analytical, utterly devoid of empathy or doubt. "Captain Clara Chen," Miller said without looking up from his screen. "Or should I call you Clara Novak? I've been reading your file. Impressive record. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 3 tours in hostile territory. Protective detail specialist, small unit tactics expert. And then Beirut happened, and you disappeared. Changed your name, took a job as a waitress, tried to vanish into civilian life. Very dramatic."
"You don't know anything about me," Clara said flatly. "I know everything about you," Miller corrected, finally looking up. His eyes behind the glasses were like chips of ice. "I know you blame yourself for 3 deaths that weren't your fault. I know you've been running from your past for 6 years. I know you have PTSD nightmares about dust and blood and people screaming your name. And I know that tonight, in that restaurant, you finally stopped running and became who you really are again. A soldier, a weapon, someone capable of extreme violence in service of what she perceives as a greater good." Clara said nothing, but her silence was acknowledgement enough. "The problem," Miller continued, closing his laptop with a soft click, "is that you're now a threat to an operation I've spent 6 months planning. Webb paid me very well to destroy Ethan Voss, and I don't like leaving contracts unfulfilled, but you've complicated things. The police are investigating, witnesses saw you take down 5 armed men, and now Voss knows he can't trust his own security. That makes him unpredictable, dangerous. So I need to know, what did you tell the police? What does Voss know? And where is he right now?" "I told them nothing useful," Clara said, meeting Miller's gaze without flinching. "And Voss is somewhere safe, somewhere you'll never find him." Miller smiled, an expression that never reached his eyes. "You're lying, not about the police. You're too smart to give them information that would compromise your ability to maneuver. But about Voss, he's not somewhere safe. He's somewhere close, probably within a few blocks, waiting for you to come back. Because that's what heroes do. They wait for each other. They believe in backup and cavalry charges and happy endings." He stood, walked slowly around the table, his movements precise and controlled. "I don't believe in any of those things. I believe in planning, execution, and eliminating variables. Right now, you're a variable. So I'm going to ask you one more time, very politely, where is Ethan Voss?" "Go to hell," Clara said simply. Miller sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "I was afraid you'd say that. Webb, bring up the external camera feeds. Let's show the captain what her heroism has accomplished." Webb moved to a laptop, typed commands, and the wall-mounted monitor flickered to life, showing multiple camera angles of the street outside the warehouse. Clara's blood turned to ice. There, parked 2 blocks away exactly where she'd left him, was Voss's Honda Accord. And walking toward the warehouse with his phone to his ear, clearly worried and ignoring her explicit instructions to stay put, was Ethan Voss himself. "He's been circling for the last 10 minutes, Miller said conversationally, checking his watch, calling your phone, which we have, by the way, getting more and more anxious. In approximately 90 seconds, he's going to walk right past our front entrance. And when he does, my people are going to grab him and bring him inside. Then we'll kill both of you, stage it to look like a murder-suicide, and leave enough evidence to suggest you were working together to extort money from Webb. Tragic story of a troubled veteran who snapped and took a billionaire hostage. The media will eat it up." Clara's mind raced through options, all of them bad. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back. She was surrounded by armed professionals. Voss was walking into a trap, and she was helpless to warn him or stop it. This was Beirut all over again, watching disaster unfold and being unable to prevent it. Except she wasn't the same person anymore. She'd learned something in that burning kitchen, something about accepting who she was instead of running from it. She wasn't helpless. She was just waiting for the right moment. "You know what your problem is, Miller," Clara said, her voice conversational. "You think too much. You plan every detail, account for every variable, build elaborate schemes when simple solutions would work better. It's an intelligence officer's disease. You forget that sometimes the best tactic is just to hit hard and fast and let chaos do the rest." Miller raised an eyebrow.
Is this supposed to intimidate me? Because, frankly, Clara headbutted the contractor holding her left arm, a brutal strike that broke his nose and sent him stumbling backward. Before anyone could react, she dropped to her knees, threaded her zip-tied hands under her feet, a flexibility exercise her yoga instructor had never intended for tactical application, and brought her hands in front of her body. The contractor on her right tried to grab her, but Clara drove her elbow into his throat, a strike that dropped him choking to the floor. She grabbed his fallen weapon, rolled behind a table as gunfire erupted, bullets punching through metal and equipment in a deafening cascade. Clara came up firing, controlled pairs just like on the range, taking out the third contractor with 2 shots center mass. Webb was moving toward his own weapon, but Clara put a round through his shoulder that spun him around and sent him crashing into a wall. Miller had drawn his own sidearm with impressive speed for a 50-year-old former intelligence officer, but Clara was faster. She put 3 rounds into the laptop he'd been using, the monitor, and the communications equipment, destroying his tactical advantage. Then she trained her weapon on him, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Drop it," she ordered. "Now." Miller complied slowly, setting his weapon on the table. His face showed no fear, just cold calculation. "Impressive. But you're still trapped in a building with more of my people on the floors below, and Voss is still walking into an ambush, so what exactly have you accomplished?" "I've changed the equation," Clara said. "I'm not the variable anymore. You are." She grabbed Miller by the collar, hauled him toward the window overlooking the street, and smashed the glass with the butt of her weapon. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. "Voss!" Clara shouted into the night. "It's a trap! Get out! Now!" Below, Ethan Voss froze in mid-step, his head snapping up toward the sound of her voice. For one frozen moment, he stood there, indecision written across his face. Then gunfire erupted from the warehouse's ground level, Miller's people trying to cut him down before he could escape. Voss ran. The billionaire who probably hadn't run anywhere in 20 years suddenly found speed he didn't know he had, sprinting back toward his car as bullets sparked off the pavement behind him. Claire provided covering fire through the broken window, forcing Miller's ground team to take cover instead of pursuing. "You can't save him forever," Miller said calmly, even with a gun pressed against his spine. "My people are professionals. They'll track him down, finish the job. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. You've only delayed the inevitable." "Then I'll delay it again," Claire said. "And again. For as long as it takes. Because that's what soldiers do, Miller. We don't give up. We don't optimize. We just keep fighting until the mission is complete or we're dead. And I'm not dead yet." She heard footsteps pounding up the stairs, more of Miller's contractors responding to the gunfire. Clara did the math instantly. Maybe 6 more hostiles, probably armed, definitely trained. She had 1 magazine, maybe 10 rounds left, and a hostage who wouldn't slow them down for long. Time to change tactics. Clara shoved Miller toward the stairs, used him as a human shield as she backed toward the fire escape. The contractors appeared in the stairwell, weapons raised, but they hesitated seeing their employer in the line of fire. "Stand down," Miller ordered, his voice sharp with command. "She won't shoot me. She's too principled, too much of a hero. That's her weakness." "You're right," Claire agreed. "I won't shoot you." Then she shot the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall beside him. The pressurized cylinder exploded in a cloud of white chemical foam that filled the stairwell, blinding everyone. Clara released Miller, shoved him into his own men, creating chaos and confusion, then dove through the emergency exit onto the fire escape. The metal stairs rang under her feet as she descended at reckless speed, taking steps 3 and 4 at a time, using the railings to swing around corners like some kind of parkour athlete. Behind her, she heard shouting, more gunfire, the sound of Miller reorganizing his people for pursuit. Second floor, first floor, the ground. Clara hit the pavement running, her injured ankle screaming protest, but her training overriding the pain. She could see Voss's Honda in the distance, engine running, the billionaire behind the wheel looking back toward the warehouse with desperate hope. Gunfire erupted from behind her. Clara zigzagged, using parked cars for cover, returning fire to keep the pursuers' heads down. A bullet grazed her shoulder, another struck the car beside her, but she kept moving, kept fighting, because stopping meant dying and dying meant failing. She reached the Honda, yanked open the passenger door, and threw herself inside. "Drive!" she shouted. Voss didn't need to be told twice. The car's tires screamed as he floored the accelerator, the vehicle fishtailing before finding traction and rocketing away from the warehouse. Clara twisted in her seat, weapon trained on the rear window, ready to return fire if pursuit appeared, but no vehicles followed them. Miller's team had lost their chance, and pursuing through Brooklyn streets would draw too much attention. They'd failed tonight, but they'd be back. Men like Miller always came back. "Are you hit?" Voss asked, his voice shaking with adrenaline and fear. "You're bleeding." "Graze," Clara said, assessing the damage. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow across her shoulder, painful but not serious. "I'll live. Unlike Webb and Miller, if I ever get my hands on them again." "Webb?" Voss's hands tightened on the wheel. Marcus was behind this? Not just Miller? Clara filled him in during the drive, explaining Webb's brother, the revenge plot, Miller's professional mercenary approach to murder. Voss listened in silence, his face growing harder with each revelation. By the time she finished, they were crossing back into Manhattan, the city's lights welcoming them home like harbor beacons guiding lost ships. "My head of security wanted me dead because I destroyed his brother's life," Voss said quietly. "And I don't even remember. That's the worst part, Clara. I've ruined so many lives in my climb to the top that I can't even remember all the names. Webb's brother is just one more casualty of my ambition." "That doesn't justify murder," Clara said firmly. "Nothing justifies what they tried to do tonight, but maybe—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it's a wake-up call about the cost of business as usual." Voss was quiet for a long moment, navigating through late-night traffic toward Manhattan's Upper East Side. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, humbler, more human than Clara had ever heard it. "I need to make this right," he said. "Not just survive, not just win, but actually make things right. The people I've hurt, the companies I've destroyed, the lives I've optimized into oblivion. Starting with finding out what happened to Webb's brother, making sure his family is taken care of, and Walter Thorne's family, and all the others." "That's a long list," Clara observed. "Then I'd better get started," Voss replied. "But first, we need to deal with the immediate problem. Miller and Webb are still out there, still dangerous, still committed to killing us. The police investigation will take weeks, maybe months. We need protection now." Clara thought about that. About her apartment that Miller's people had photographed. About her waitress job that no longer existed. About the invisible life she'd tried to build that had been shattered along with the restaurant's windows. She thought about Webb's rage and Miller's cold professionalism, and the certainty that they wouldn't stop until their contract was fulfilled or they were dead. "I know a place," she said finally. "Safe house, off the books, run by people who owe me favors from the old days. Former special operations personnel, the kind of people who know how to disappear when necessary. We can hole up there while we figure out our next move." "Our next move?" Voss asked. "Clara, you don't have to stay involved in this. You've already saved my life twice tonight. I can hire professional security, people with resources and equipment." "Professional security like Marcus Webb?" Clara interrupted. "No offense, Voss, but your judgment on security personnel is demonstrably terrible. You need someone you can actually trust, someone who isn't in this for money, someone who has skin in the game. And like it or not, Miller made this my fight when he sent that photograph. So I'm seeing it through to the end." They drove in silence for several minutes, the city flowing past outside like a river of light and steel. Clara's shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed her, her ankle was swelling inside her boot, and she could feel exhaustion creeping in around the edges of her adrenaline-fueled alertness. She'd been running on training and instinct for hours now, but eventually the body demanded payment. "Thank you," Voss said quietly. "For everything. For saving me in the restaurant, for coming after me when you could have run, for not giving up even when it would have been smarter to walk away. I don't deserve your help, Clara. I know that, but I'm grateful for it anyway." Clara looked at him, this billionaire who'd learned humility the hard way, who was trying to be better even while running for his life. She thought about the 3 people who died in Beirut, about 6 years of hiding and failure and trying to be smaller than she was. She thought about the moment in the burning kitchen when she'd decided to stop running and start fighting again. "Maybe we both deserve a second chance," she said. Maybe this is what redemption looks like, messy and violent and harder than either of us expected. But we're still alive, Voss. We're still fighting. That has to count for something. The safe house was in Queens, a nondescript brownstone in a working-class neighborhood where people minded their own business and extra security cameras wouldn't raise eyebrows. Clara made Voss park 3 blocks away, and they approached on foot, Clara's trained eyes scanning for surveillance, for traps, for any sign that Miller had anticipated their destination. Nothing. The street was quiet, normal, safe. Clara knocked on the door in a specific pattern, 3, quick, 2 slow, 1 quick, and waited. After a moment, locks disengaged and the door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of scars that came from combat, not accidents. Clara Chen, the woman said, her voice warm with surprise and genuine affection. 6 years without a word, and now you show up at my door at 2 a.m. with a bleeding shoulder and a billionaire in tow. Should I even ask? Probably not, Clara admitted. Rachel, this is Ethan Voss. Voss, this is Major Rachel Santos, former Delta Force, now runs a very private security consulting firm. We served together before Beirut. Before you went ghost, Rachel corrected, stepping aside to let them enter. Come on, let's get you patched up and figure out what kind of trouble you've dragged to my doorstep this time. Inside, the safe house looked like any other middle-class home. Comfortable furniture, family photos on the walls, lived in and normal. But Clara knew that beneath that facade was serious security. Reinforced doors, bulletproof windows, weapons caches, communications equipment that could reach anywhere in the world. Rachel led them to a back room that served as a medical bay, ordered Clara to sit, and began efficiently treating her shoulder wound. Her hands were steady, professional, gentle, despite the efficiency. So, Rachel said as she worked, want to tell me why someone's trying to kill you and Mr. Billionaire here? Or should I just assume it's the usual reasons? Greed, revenge, someone's ego got bruised. Clara gave her the abbreviated version, hitting the key points. Webb's revenge plot, Miller's professional assassination attempt, the restaurant siege, the warehouse confrontation. Rachel listened without interrupting, her experienced eyes cataloging injuries and calculating threat levels. Miller, Rachel said when Clara finished. Frank Miller, ex-CIA, went private about 15 years ago, works as a fixer for people with problems that need permanent solutions. You know him? Clara asked. Know of him, Rachel corrected. He's got a reputation in certain circles. Professional, expensive, absolutely ruthless. If he took a contract on you, he won't stop until it's fulfilled or he's dead. That's how he maintains his reputation. 100% completion rate. Wonderful, Voss muttered. So we're being hunted by a professional killer who never fails. That's just fantastic. Not never, Rachel said, finishing Clara's bandage with practiced efficiency. There's always a first time. And if anyone can give him that first failure, it's Clara. She was the best protective detail specialist I ever served with, kept a 3-star general alive through 2 assassination attempts and a car bombing. Until Beirut, she paused, met Clara's eyes with understanding and sympathy. Until something went wrong that wasn't her fault. Felt like my fault, Clara said quietly. Feels and is are different things, Rachel replied firmly. You made the right call with bad intelligence. The review board cleared you. The only person who never forgave you was you. Clara said nothing, but something in her chest loosened slightly. 6 years of carrying that weight, and hearing someone she respected say it wasn't her fault helped more than 6 years of therapy ever had. So, what's the plan? Rachel asked, turning to practical matters. You can stay here as long as you need. I've got resources, equipment, personnel if necessary, but eventually Miller will find you. Men like him always do. So what's the end game? Wait him out? Go to the police? Or she paused, reading Clara's expression. You're thinking about going after him first. He made it personal, Clara said. He photographed my home, threatened people I was protecting, turned this into something bigger than just a business contract. So yeah, I'm thinking we finish this. Tonight if possible, before Miller has time to regroup and try again. Tonight you're injured and exhausted, Rachel countered. Tomorrow you'll be rested and ready, and I'll have had time to call in some favors, get you proper equipment and backup. You want to go after Miller? Do it smart, not fast. Clara wanted to argue, but her body was already agreeing with Rachel. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving behind pain and exhaustion and the bone-deep weariness that came after combat. She'd been running on fumes and training for hours, and even the best soldiers needed rest eventually. Fine, she agreed reluctantly. Tomorrow. But we move at dawn before Miller has time to fortify his position or relocate entirely. Dawn it is, Rachel said. Now, both of you get some sleep. There's rooms upstairs, everything you need. I'll monitor security feeds, make sure nobody followed you here. And Clara? Rachel's voice softened. It's good to see you fighting again. Not running, fighting. That's the Clara Chen I remember. Clara nodded, too tired for words, and let Rachel show them to their rooms. Voss disappeared into his immediately, the exhaustion of the night finally catching up with him. Clara stood in her doorway for a moment, looking at the simple bed, the clean sheets, the normalcy of it all. 6 years ago, she'd closed her eyes on a hospital bed and promised herself she'd never fight again. Tonight, she closed them knowing that tomorrow she'd finish the war she never wanted but couldn't avoid. The difference was that this time she wasn't running from who she was. She was finally accepting it. Sleep came hard and left early. Clara woke at 5 in the morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of voices downstairs. Her shoulder ached where the bullet had grazed her. Her ankle was stiff and swollen, and every muscle in her body screamed protest as she rolled out of bed. She felt like she'd been hit by a truck, which wasn't far from the truth considering the night she'd survived. But her mind was clear, focused, ready. The nightmares that usually plagued her sleep had been absent for the first time in 6 years, maybe because she'd finally stopped running from them. Downstairs, Rachel had converted the dining room into a tactical operations center. Maps covered the table, laptop screens showed security feeds and satellite imagery, and 3 other people Clara didn't recognize were studying the intelligence with professional intensity. "Morning, sleeping beauty," Rachel said with a slight smile. "Coffee's hot, breakfast is cold pizza from last night, and I've assembled a team. Clara Chen, meet your backup for today's suicide mission." The first person stepped forward, a man in his 30s with the build of a heavyweight boxer and a face that suggested Pacific Islander heritage. "Tommy Kalani, former Marine Force Recon. Rachel says you're the real deal, Captain. Looking forward to working with you." The second was a woman about Clara's age, blonde hair pulled back in a tactical braid, eyes that missed nothing. "Jen Morrison, former Army Intelligence. I'll be your electronic warfare specialist and secondary sniper if needed." The third was younger, maybe 25, with nervous energy and the kind of intensity that came from too much caffeine and too many missions. "Derek Chen, no relation, former Air Force pararescue. I'm your medic and demolitions guy because apparently this op requires both." Clara looked at Rachel with raised eyebrows. "You called in 3 specialists in 6 hours? How?" "I called in favors," Rachel said simply. "These people owe me, and more importantly, they respect you. I told them Captain Clara Chen needed backup for a high-risk operation, and they all volunteered. Nobody who served with you has forgotten what you did before Beirut, Clara. Nobody." Clara felt something catch in her throat, emotions she'd buried for 6 years threatening to surface. She pushed them down, focused on the mission, but she filed away the gift Rachel had given her, the knowledge that she hadn't been forgotten, that her service had mattered to someone besides the ghosts in her head. "Thank you," she said quietly. "All of you. Now let's figure out how to end this." Ethan Voss appeared in the doorway, looking remarkably composed for a man who'd nearly been killed 3 times in 12 hours. He'd showered, found clean clothes somewhere, and his CEO mask was back in place. But Clara could see the fear still lurking in his eyes, the understanding that money and power meant nothing when someone wanted you dead. "What's the plan?" he asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Rachel. "The plan," Clara said, moving to the maps spread across the table, "is to force Miller's hand. He's operating from that Red Hook warehouse, or was last night. He's probably relocated by now, but he can't have gone far. His equipment, his personnel, his tactical advantage all depend on infrastructure. So we find his new location, and we hit him hard before he's ready." "And how exactly do we find him?" Voss asked. "The man's a professional at disappearing." Jen Morrison spoke up, her fingers dancing across a laptop keyboard. Actually, that's easier than you'd think. Miller might be good at operational security, but he's still operating in a digital world. Cell towers, traffic cameras, satellite imagery, everything leaves a trace if you know where to look. And I'm very good at looking. She pulled up a screen showing cell tower data. I've been tracking burner phone activity in the Red Hook area over the past 6 hours. Most of it's normal. Dealers, affairs, people avoiding their parole officers. But there's a cluster of phones that pinged off 3 different towers in a very specific pattern, moving from Red Hook to Sunset Park to Borough Park. That's not random movement. That's a tactical team relocating to a new position. Where? Clara asked, studying the map. Here. Jen pointed to an industrial complex near the Gowanus Canal. Old shipping facility, mostly abandoned, owned by a shell company that traces back to another shell company that eventually disappears in the Cayman Islands. Classic money laundering setup, but also perfect for someone who needs a secure facility on short notice. That's him, Clara said with certainty. Miller would have backup locations pre-scouted, ready to activate if his primary site was compromised. This fits his pattern, isolated, defensible, near water for potential extraction. Tommy Kalani studied the satellite imagery with a professional eye. Buildings got good sight lines, limited approaches, probably reinforced. If Miller's smart, and everything suggests he is, he's expecting us to come after him, could be walking into a kill box. That's why we don't walk in, Clara said. We make him come to us. She turned to Voss, an idea forming. Miller's contract is to kill you, right? That's what Webb paid him for. That's what his professional reputation depends on completing. So we use that. We leak your location, make it look like you're vulnerable, set a trap of our own. Using me as bait, Voss said slowly. I'm not loving this plan, Clara. You have a better one? Rachel asked. Because sitting here waiting for Miller to regroup and try again isn't a plan. It's just slow suicide. Voss was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Okay. What do I need to do? Clara laid it out step by step. They'd use Voss's social media. He had millions of followers. His posts got tracked by financial analysts and gossip sites alike to leak his location. A carefully crafted message about needing time to recover, about staying at a friend's place in Queens with just enough detail to pinpoint the general area. Miller's people would be monitoring all of Voss's communications, waiting for exactly this kind of slip. But we won't actually be at that location, Claire explained. We'll set up at a secondary site 3 blocks away, somewhere with clear sightlines and tactical advantage. When Miller's team moves in to hit the fake location, we hit them from behind, catch them in the open, end this before they know what's happening. And if they see through the deception? Derek asked, playing devil's advocate. If Miller smells the trap? Then we adapt, Clara said simply. We've got better training, better motivation, and home field advantage. Miller's good, but he's one man with hired contractors. We're a team. They spent the next 2 hours planning every detail, running through scenarios, identifying failure points, and backup plans. Rachel knew the Queens area intimately, helped them select the perfect location, an old warehouse with rooftop access, multiple exits, and clear sightlines to the bait house 3 blocks away. Tommy and Jen scouted the area in person, confirmed the tactical assessment, set up equipment for surveillance and communication. Derek prepared medical supplies and staged them at strategic locations because Clara was realistic about the likelihood of casualties. And Voss, with Rachel's guidance, crafted the perfect social media post, vulnerable enough to seem genuine, specific enough to pinpoint his location, vague enough to not seem like an obvious trap. By noon, everything was ready. Voss posted the message. Grateful to be alive after last night's terror, taking time to recover at a friend's place in Queens and reflect on what matters. Thank you to everyone who reached out, along with a photo that showed just enough background detail to identify the neighborhood. Within minutes, his post had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, and more importantly, the attention of exactly the people they wanted. Jen monitored communications traffic and reported increased burner phone activity in the Sunset Park area, the phones moving toward Queens in a pattern consistent with a tactical team deploying for an operation. They took the bait, Jen said with satisfaction. ETA to target area approximately 45 minutes, assuming they're doing standard counter-surveillance procedures. Positions, Clara ordered, and the team moved with military precision. Tommy on the warehouse roof with a scoped rifle, providing overwatch and long-range support. Jen in a van half a block away, running electronic surveillance and communication. Derek on the ground floor with medical supplies and a shotgun loaded with less lethal rounds because their goal was to stop Miller, not necessarily kill everyone in his crew. And Clara herself positioned at the warehouse's second-floor window, with clear view of the approach route and the bait house. Rachel stayed with Voss in the Safe House Command Center, monitoring everything remotely, ready to call in NYPD as backup if things went sideways. They had a 3-minute window once shooting started before police response would arrive. The whole operation needed to be over by then, one way or another. The waiting was the hardest part. Clara had forgotten that about tactical operations. How the anticipation before action stretched time into something elastic and painful. She used the time to check her equipment, to control her breathing, to center herself in the calm space that separated thinking from doing. Her weapon was a borrowed Glock 19, same as she'd trained with in the military. Familiar, reliable, an extension of her will. She had 4 spare magazines, body armor borrowed from Rachel's equipment cache, and the absolute certainty that she would not fail today. Not again. Never again. Movement. Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. 2 vehicles approaching from the east. Black SUV and a panel van, tinted windows, moving slow, checking sight lines. This is them. Claire's heartbeat slowed, training taking over, the world narrowing to weapons and angles and timing. She watched through her scope as the vehicles stopped 2 blocks from the bait house, disgorging 6 figures in tactical gear. They moved with professional caution, spreading out, using cover, advancing in a coordinated pattern that spoke of military training and recent practice. I count 6 hostiles, Tommy reported. Standard tactical formation, no visual on Miller yet. He's in the van, Clara said, spotting a 7th figure visible through the vehicle's windshield. Staying back, directing the operation remotely. Tommy, can you get a shot? Negative. Angle's wrong. He's behind ballistic glass anyway. We need him out of that vehicle. Clara thought fast. Miller was too smart to expose himself unnecessarily, too experienced to fall for obvious tricks. But he had one weakness, his professional pride. He'd never failed to complete a contract, and that reputation mattered more than his safety. If they could make him think his team was failing, that Voss was about to escape, Miller would come out to finish the job personally. Change of plans? Clara said into her radio. Voss, I need you on site. Now. What? Rachel's voice was sharp with alarm. Clara, that wasn't the plan. Plans change. Miller needs to see Voss, needs to think he's vulnerable and about to escape. That's the only way to draw him out. Voss, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? There was a long pause, then Voss's voice came through, steady despite the fear Clara could hear underneath. Tell me what to do. Rachel's going to drive you here in that old pickup truck you saw in her garage. You're going to approach the bait house like you're checking to make sure it's safe, then act panicked when you see Miller's team. Run toward our position, toward the warehouse. Miller will see his target escaping and have to make a choice. Let his team handle it and risk failure, or finish it himself. And if he just orders his team to shoot me? Voss asked. Then Tommy puts rounds through the windshield of every vehicle between you and them, and we extract you under covering fire, Clara said. But I don't think he will. Miller's too professional to risk a shot his team might miss. He'll want to guarantee the kill personally. This is insane, Rachel muttered, but Clara could hear the engine starting in the background. ETA 4 minutes. Don't get my friend killed, Clara. Not planning on it, Clara replied, then switched channels. All units, be ready to engage on my signal. Targets are armed and dangerous, but remember, we want Miller alive if possible. He's the only one who can testify about Webb's involvement and potentially reveal who else might be targeting Voss. The next 4 minutes stretched like hours. Clara watched Miller's tactical team approach the bait house, watched them stack up at the entrance, preparing to breach. They were good, she had to admit. Their positioning was textbook, their communication clear even from a distance, their weapons handling professional. But they were focused on the wrong target, and that would be their undoing. Rachel's pickup truck appeared at the end of the street, moving at normal speed, nothing to attract attention. Through her scope, Clara could see Voss in the passenger seat, his face pale but determined. The truck slowed as it approached the bait house, and Voss stepped out, walked toward the building like someone checking an address. And then he saw Miller's team. His reaction was perfect, genuine shock and fear, a stumbling backward step, a hand reaching for his phone. One of Miller's contractors noticed him, shouted something, raised his weapon. And Voss ran, sprinting away from the bait house directly toward Clara's position, exactly as planned. "Contact," someone on Miller's team yelled, and suddenly the street erupted into controlled chaos. The contractors abandoned their breach formation, redirecting toward Voss, weapons tracking his movement. But they were professionals. No wild shots, no panic fire, just coordinated pursuit to capture or kill their target. And in the panel van, Frank Miller opened his door and stepped out, a compact submachine gun in his hands, his face set with cold determination. He was done letting others handle his contract. He would finish this personally, guarantee the kill, protect his reputation. "Now," Clara said quietly into her radio. Tommy's rifle cracked from the rooftop, a sound like God's own judgment. The round struck Miller's weapon, tore it from his hands in a spray of metal fragments. Before Miller could process what happened, before his team could react, Clara and Derek emerged from the warehouse, weapons trained on the contractors, voices sharp with command. "Drop your weapons! Hands up! Now!" The contractors froze, caught between targets, their tactical advantage evaporating as they realized they'd walked into an ambush. Clara could see the calculations running behind their eyes. Fight or surrender, die or survive, loyalty to a paycheck versus self-preservation. 3 of them dropped their weapons immediately, hands raised. Smart men who understood when a mission was over. The other 3 tried to fight, training overriding judgment, and Clara felt something cold and final settle into her chest. She fired. 3 controlled pairs, center mass, exactly like on the range. The contractors went down, not dead but definitely out of the fight, screaming and clutching wounds that would require surgery but weren't immediately fatal. Clara had aimed to stop, not to kill, because she was still trying to be better than the violence she'd been trained for. Tommy fired twice more from his position, taking down a contractor who'd tried to draw a backup weapon and another who'd reached for a radio to call for reinforcement. In less than 10 seconds, Miller's entire tactical team was neutralized. 3 surrendering, 3 wounded, none of them a threat anymore. And Frank Miller stood alone in the middle of the street, his weapon destroyed, his team defeated, his perfect record shattered. He looked at Clara with something like respect in his cold eyes. "Impressive," he said calmly. "But you're making a mistake, Captain. You think stopping me changes anything? Webb will just hire someone else. There are a dozen contractors who'd take this contract, and some of them are better than me. You haven't saved Voss. You've just delayed his death."
"Maybe," Clara acknowledged, approaching him slowly, weapon trained on center mass. "Or maybe we've changed the equation enough that Webb realizes revenge isn't worth spending the rest of his life in prison. Derek, secure Miller. Zip ties, thorough search. Treat him like the professional threat he is." Derek moved in with practiced efficiency, and Miller didn't resist. He was too smart for that, too experienced to fight when the tactical situation was hopeless. Within minutes, he was secured, searched, and sitting on the curb like a common criminal instead of a feared contract killer. "Where's Marcus Webb?" Clara demanded. "He's the one who hired you, the one who's been orchestrating all of this." "Where is he?" Miller smiled, an expression that held no warmth. "You shot him in the shoulder last night, remember? He's probably in a private clinic somewhere, getting patched up by doctors who don't ask questions. I don't know where specifically, need-to-know basis, but he'll come for you eventually. Men like Webb, consumed by revenge, they don't stop until they're dead or satisfied." "Then I guess he'll have to die," Clara said flatly, and she meant it. 6 years of pacifism, 6 years of trying to be something other than a soldier had evaporated in the fire of the restaurant kitchen. She'd accepted who she was, what she was capable of, and the cost of protecting people she cared about. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Rachel had kept her word, giving them their 3-minute window before calling in NYPD. Clara looked at her team. Tommy climbing down from his rooftop position, Jen emerging from her surveillance van, Derek providing first aid to the wounded contractors with professional detachment. They'd worked together like they'd been training for years instead of hours,
The kind of seamless coordination that only came from shared military experience and mutual trust. "Good work," Clara said to all of them. "Outstanding work. This stays off the record. You were never here, never involved. Rachel will clean the scene, remove any trace of your participation. But know that you helped save lives today. Multiple lives. That matters." Tommy clasped her shoulder briefly. "Good to see you back in action, Captain. If you ever need backup again, you call. Anytime, any place." The others echoed the sentiment, and then they disappeared like ghosts, taking their equipment, leaving no trace they'd ever existed. By the time the first NYPD cruiser screamed around the corner, it was just Clara, Miller secured on the curb, and 6 contractors in various states of surrender and injury. Clara raised her hands, weapon pointed at the sky, making herself non-threatening as tactical officers swarmed the scene. She'd been through this before, knew the protocol, understood how to be processed as a witness rather than a suspect. It helped that Ethan Voss was there, already talking to officers, explaining the situation, using his influence and resources to smooth the way. The questioning took hours. Multiple detectives, multiple statements, everything recorded and cross-referenced and checked for inconsistencies. Clara told them the truth, mostly. She explained Miller's contract-killing operation, Webb's revenge plot, the tactical ambush that had stopped both. She left out Rachel's involvement, her team's participation, the fact that she'd deliberately set a trap that put civilians in danger to achieve her objective. Some truths didn't need to be shared with police. Some truths were just for the people who'd lived them. By evening, Miller and his surviving contractors were in custody, charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, weapons violations, and a dozen other crimes that would keep them locked up for decades. Webb was still at large, but with Miller captured and willing to provide testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence, it was only a matter of time before they found him. Clara and Voss sat in an interview room, drinking terrible coffee from paper cups, waiting for the final paperwork that would let them leave. "It's over," Voss said quietly. "It's really over." "This part is over," Clara corrected, "but the consequences are just beginning. Miller will testify, Webb will be caught, and then it all becomes public. Your head of security tried to have you killed. The media will have a field day. Your board will demand answers. Shareholders will panic. You're looking at months of crisis management." "I know," Voss said, "and I deserve it. I deserve all of it. But Clara, I meant what I said last night. I'm going to make things right, starting with Webb's brother's family. I've already had my people track them down, and I'm setting up a trust fund, full benefits, everything they lost when I destroyed the company. It won't bring him back, won't undo the harm, but it's a start." "And Walter Thorne's family?" Clara asked. "Already done," Voss replied. "Full compensation for the company I destroyed, plus a foundation in his name dedicated to helping small businesses resist hostile takeovers. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to prevent it from happening to others." Clara studied him, this billionaire who'd learned empathy through violence, who'd discovered his conscience only after nearly losing his life. She wanted to be cynical, to dismiss his promises as the temporary guilt of someone who'd been scared straight. But she saw genuine remorse in his eyes, genuine determination to be better. "What about me?" she asked. "What happens to the waitress who saved your life and destroyed her own in the process?" Voss set down his coffee cup, met her eyes directly. "I owe you everything, Clara. My life, multiple times over. And I pay my debts. So I'm offering you a job, head of a new security division I'm creating. Not corporate security like Webb ran. Something different. A team dedicated to protecting people who can't protect themselves. To stopping men like Miller before they hurt innocent people. Full autonomy, unlimited budget, resources to do things right." "I'm not interested in working for a corporation," Clara said immediately. "Not a corporation," Voss corrected. "A foundation. Separate from my businesses, funded by my personal wealth, answerable only to a board that includes you as a voting member. You'd have complete control over operations, personnel, mission selection. I'd just be the guy who signs the checks and stays out of your way." Clara was silent, processing the offer. 6 years ago, she'd walked away from protective work because she couldn't handle the weight of failure. But tonight, she'd carried that weight and kept walking. She'd saved lives, stopped threats, done the work she'd been trained for, and it felt right in a way that waiting tables never had. "I need time to think," she said finally. to process everything that's happened, figure out what I want my life to look like. But Voss, if I take this job, I'm doing it my way. No compromises, no corporate politics, no optimizing human lives into spreadsheets. That's exactly why I'm offering it to you, Voss said, because you won't compromise, because you'll do what's right instead of what's profitable. That's worth more than all my billions. A detective appeared in the doorway, paperwork in hand, telling them they were free to go. Clara stood, feeling every injury from the past 24 hours, every bruise and cut and strained muscle. She felt like she'd been through a war, which wasn't far from the truth. Outside the precinct, the New York evening was cool and clear, the city's lights beginning to glow as day faded into night. Clara stood on the steps, looking at the city she'd tried to hide in, the city that had ultimately forced her to remember who she was. "Where will you go?" Voss asked beside her. "Rachel's safe house for tonight," Clara said. "After that, I don't know. My apartment's compromised, my waitress job obviously doesn't exist anymore, and I can't exactly go back to being invisible. So I guess I figure out who Clara Chen is supposed to be now that she's not hiding anymore." "For what it's worth," Voss said, "I think she's supposed to be exactly what she is. A protector, a fighter, someone who does the hard things because they need doing. The world needs people like you, Clara. People who'll stand between the innocent and the violent, who won't back down even when it's dangerous, who care more about lives than profit margins." Clara smiled slightly. "Is this your way of trying to convince me to take the job?" "Maybe," Voss admitted. "But it's also just the truth. Think about it, Clara. No pressure, no deadline. Just know that whatever you decide, you have my gratitude and my support, always." He walked away toward a waiting car, his security detail, new people, carefully vetted, none of them with revenge motives, surrounding him with professional caution. Clara watched him go, this man who'd been transformed by crisis from a corporate raider into something almost human. She pulled out her phone, saw dozens of missed messages. Most were from reporters who'd somehow gotten her number, wanting interviews about the hero Waitress who'd stopped a terrorist attack. She deleted those without reading, but one message made her pause. It was from James Chen, the bartender from Le Bernardin Noir, the Marine who'd recognized a kindred spirit in the quiet waitress. The message was simple. "Heard what happened. You okay? Bunch of us from the restaurant are getting together tomorrow, survivors therapy session disguised as drinks. You should come, you saved our lives. Let us say thank you properly." Clara stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply. "I'll be there." Because maybe that was part of moving forward, accepting gratitude, acknowledging community, understanding that she didn't have to carry everything alone. The 3 people who died in Beirut would always be with her. Their ghosts would never fully leave. But maybe she could honor them by saving others, by being the protector she'd trained to be, by accepting that failure was part of the job, but so was success. She walked down the precinct steps into the New York evening, just another person in a city of millions, except she wasn't invisible anymore. She was Captain Clara Chen, 6 years after Beirut, finally ready to be who she'd always been underneath the fear and guilt and hiding. 3 days later, Marcus Webb was arrested, trying to board a flight to Mexico City, his shoulder still bandaged from Clara's bullet, his face showing the defeat of a man whose revenge had destroyed him instead of healing him. He confessed to everything, hiring Miller, organizing the attack, paying Silas Thorne to be the visible face of the operation while Webb pulled strings from the shadows. The trial would be lengthy, the media coverage intense, but justice would be served. 2 weeks later, Clara met with Voss in a coffee shop far from corporate towers and billionaire haunts, a normal place for normal people. She'd spent the time thinking, healing, talking with Rachel and her team about what it meant to be a soldier in civilian life, what it meant to use violence for protection instead of destruction. "I'll take the job," she told Voss, "on 3 conditions. First, complete operational autonomy. I choose the missions, I choose the team, I choose the methods. No interference from you or any board." "Agreed," Voss said immediately. "Second, we help people who can't afford protection. Not just billionaires and corporations, but ordinary people facing extraordinary threats. Domestic abuse victims who need to disappear, witnesses who need protection, people caught in situations beyond their control." "Agreed," Voss said again. "That's exactly the kind of work I hoped you'd do." Third, Clara said, and her voice was harder now. You continue making amends for the companies you destroyed, the lives you ruined. Real amends, not just PR gestures. Because I won't protect someone who keeps creating the kind of pain that drove Webb to murder. Clear? Voss met her eyes without flinching. Crystal clear. And Clara, I've already started. Thorn Industries is being rebuilt with the original employees given first priority for rehiring. Webb's brother's family has been compensated. I'm restructuring my entire approach to acquisitions, bringing in ethics consultants, creating worker protection clauses. It won't undo the past, but it'll make the future different. Clara studied him, looking for deception, for the corporate doublespeak she'd expected. But she saw only sincerity, the genuine desire of a man trying to be better than he'd been. Maybe people could change. Maybe redemption was possible for everyone, even billionaire corporate raiders who'd learned conscience through violence. Then we have a deal, Clara said, extending her hand. Voss shook it, and in that gesture, a new chapter began. Not just for Clara Chen, but for everyone she'd protect going forward, everyone who'd benefit from her second chance at being who she was meant to be. 6 months later, the foundation was operational. A small team of carefully vetted specialists, a secure facility in Queens, connections to law enforcement and military networks that could provide support when needed. They'd already completed 4 operations, protecting 2 domestic abuse victims, stopping a stalker targeting a young journalist, and providing security for a whistleblower testifying against corporate corruption. And on a cool October evening, exactly 1 year after the restaurant attack, Clara stood in Le Bernardin Noir's newly reopened dining room. The restaurant had been rebuilt, more beautiful than before, with a small plaque by the entrance commemorating the night when violence had visited and been defeated by courage. The owner had invited her to the reopening, along with all the other survivors from that night. Clara had almost declined. Publicity still made her uncomfortable, the spotlight something she'd spent 6 years avoiding. But James the bartender had convinced her. People need to see that courage looks like, he'd said. Not superhuman, not impossible. Just someone who did what needed doing when it needed doing. That's worth celebrating. So Clara wore a simple black dress instead of tactical gear, smiled at people who wanted to shake her hand or thank her, and felt something she hadn't felt in 6 years: pride. Not the arrogant pride of someone who thought they were better than everyone else, but the quiet pride of someone who'd done their job well, who'd saved lives, who'd stood between the innocent and the violent and refused to back down. Ethan Voss approached, looking uncomfortable in the crowd but forcing himself to engage because facing discomfort was part of his redemption. Clara, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy for you. It's getting easier, Clara admitted, accepting that I'm not invisible anymore, that people know who I am and what I can do. It's strange, but not bad. Just different. The Foundation's doing good work, Voss said. The reports I've seen, lives saved, threats stopped, people protected who had nowhere else to turn. That's what I hoped for when I made the offer. It's what I hoped for too, Clara said. For 6 years I thought the answer was to be smaller, safer, to hide from who I was. But that night in this restaurant taught me something. You can't hide from yourself. You can only choose what to do with who you are. Violence for violence's sake, or violence for protection. Destruction, or salvation. I chose salvation. And the nightmares? Voss asked quietly. The ghosts from Beirut? Clara thought about that. About the 3 people who'd died because she'd made a call based on bad intelligence. About 6 years of carrying that weight and letting it crush her. She thought about how the nightmares had changed over the past year. Less frequent, less vivid, less overwhelming. They hadn't disappeared, probably never would completely, but they'd transformed from crushing guilt into something she could carry, something that reminded her why her work mattered. They're still there, she said honestly, but now when I dream about the people I couldn't save, I also dream about the people I did save, the 40 in this restaurant, the ones my team has protected since. That doesn't erase the failures, doesn't make them hurt less, but it gives them context, meaning. I failed once. I've succeeded many times since. That has to count for something. Across the room, she saw James raising a glass, saw the other survivors from that night gathered together, people who'd been strangers but were now bound by shared trauma and shared survival. They called her over, wanted her to join the toast, wanted to include her in their circle of healing. Clara looked at Voss. at this man who'd been transformed by violence from someone who saw people as numbers into someone who saw them as human beings worthy of protection. She looked at the rebuilt restaurant, at the plaque commemorating courage, at the city beyond the windows where millions of people lived their lives with no idea how close they'd come to tragedy. "I need to go," she told Voss. "But thank you for the opportunity, for the trust, for believing that someone broken could be put back together differently and be stronger for it." "You were never broken," Voss said gently, "just bent by the weight of caring too much. The world needs more people bent by caring, Clara, not fewer." She walked toward the group of survivors, toward the people she'd saved, toward the community that had formed in the aftermath of violence. They welcomed her with smiles and gratitude, with shared understanding of what they'd survived together, with the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people did extraordinary things, not because they were heroes, but because someone had to. And as Clara Chen raised her glass to toast survival, courage, and second chances, she felt the invisible waitress finally fade away completely, replaced by someone stronger, someone whole, someone who'd stopped running from her past and started running toward her future. She'd been forged in violence twice, once in Beirut, where she'd broken, and once in this restaurant where she'd been reborn. The second forging had tempered the steel that the first had cracked, had transformed failure into purpose, had turned a soldier trying to hide into a protector choosing to fight. Outside the restaurant windows, New York City glowed with evening light, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, an endless dance of human connection and struggle and hope. And somewhere in that vast city, people needed protection, faced threats beyond their control, waited for someone brave enough or foolish enough or committed enough to stand between them and darkness. Clara Chen would find them, would protect them, would carry her ghosts and her scars and her hard-won wisdom into whatever battles came next. Because that's what soldiers did, what protectors did, what people who'd been bent by caring too much did. They fought. They endured. They refused to break. And sometimes in the process, they saved the world one life at a time.